The night in Bikini Bottom was as gentle as a sigh. Soft waves brushed against coral walls, and the faint hum of the ocean resonated like a heartbeat beneath the sea. Inside his cozy pineapple home, SpongeBob lay on his square, neatly made bed, wrapped in a warm blanket patterned with little bubbles. The room was bathed in a dim golden glow from his bedside lamp, a soft halo that reached the corners of the room but faded before touching the ceiling. Outside, the ocean currents moved lazily, carrying a few drifting jellyfish that glowed faintly through his round window. They pulsed in slow rhythm, tiny lanterns floating through the dark blue expanse. SpongeBob's eyelids fluttered, his breathing even. He was half asleep, that delicate state where dreams begin to mix with reality, where the line between the waking world and the dream world softens like a ripple on water. Then a faint sound. Not quite a pop, not quite a hum. Something between the two, like the whisper of a bubble being born. SpongeBob's eyes opened just slightly. At first everything seemed normal, his clock ticking softly on the wall, Gary asleep on a patch of coral bedding nearby, the faint light of his lamp reflecting off a picture frame. But then, in the far corner of the room, just beside his bookshelf, he noticed it. A small shimmer. At first it was nothing more than a dot, a glint of light like the reflection from a pearl. But it pulsed once, then again, and with each pulse it grew. The shimmer began to stretch, forming a translucent orb that hovered an inch above the floor. It looked fragile, a perfect bubble, yet different. Its surface glowed faintly with all the colors of the sea, pink, turquoise, and pale gold swirling together like liquid aurora. SpongeBob sat up slowly, rubbing his eyes. "Mm-hmm," he murmured, his voice small in the stillness. "What's this little guy doing here?" He slid off the bed, his square slippers padding quietly across the wooden floor. The bubble floated upward, reacting to his movement almost as if it sensed him. For a moment, it hovered still, spinning softly in the air, then pulsed again, releasing tiny ripples that made the light in the room shimmer like water. When SpongeBob took another step forward, the ripples spread to the walls. His picture frames trembled. His dresser reflected soft waves of light, as if submerged under the ocean itself. The entire room began to move gently, bending and breathing, its shapes turning liquid for a heartbeat before settling again. "Whoa," he whispered, eyes wide. The bubble, as if answering, grew a little larger now, the size of a basketball, glowing brighter. SpongeBob could see patterns moving inside it, little swirls of light, like miniature galaxies forming and dissolving. It was no ordinary bubble. It was alive in a way that made the air feel charged and calm at once. Gary stirred from his coral bed and let out a questioning, "Meow?" SpongeBob turned briefly, smiling. "It's okay, Gare Bear, just a nighttime visitor." But when he looked back, the bubble had changed again. It was now shimmering like glass, its center glowing with soft silver blue light. The room's shadows deepened, and the bubble began to cast reflections across the walls. Every surface his alarm clock, the picture frames, even the bubbles on his blanket caught fragments of that glow. And then SpongeBob noticed something strange. The glow wasn't random. It was moving, shaping itself into gentle patterns, circles within circles, like ripples on a still pond. He tilted his head. The ripples began to spin faster. The bubble's edges quivered and stretched, no longer perfectly round, but shifting, almost forming an archway. The light inside became brighter, softer, blending with the yellow of SpongeBob's walls until the whole corner of the room looked like it was made of melted sunlight. "Are you a doorway?" SpongeBob asked softly, half smiling, half amazed. He reached out his hand. His reflection shimmered across the bubble's surface, a slightly distorted version of himself smiling back. As his fingertips neared it, the air around the bubble tingled. It felt cool, like standing near an open window during a gentle rain. When his hand finally touched the bubble, it didn't pop. Instead, it rippled outward, stretching like liquid glass. A soft vibration filled the room, not loud, but deep enough to be felt rather than heard. The walls began to ripple again, this time more strongly, as if SpongeBob's entire home had become part of the bubble itself. His lamp flickered once, then dimmed, its light merging into the golden blue glow that now filled every inch of space. He took a breath. The air felt lighter, softer, like breathing in starlight. Everything around him started to dissolve piece by piece. The bookshelf bent like jelly, its edges melting into color. The bed beneath him faded until he was standing on nothing but light. Gary's soft meow echoed faintly, distant and dreamlike, as if coming from another dimension. SpongeBob looked around, wide-eyed but calm. The bubble around him was growing, expanding, until it wasn't a bubble anymore, but a sphere of shimmering energy that replaced the walls of his home. He could see through it now. Outside, the ocean currents had slowed, frozen mid-sway, as though time had stopped. The jellyfish outside the window hung motionless, their glow trapped in place. Then came the final pulse, a deep, resonant hum that rippled through his chest, and everything dissolved into light. SpongeBob blinked. For a second, there was nothing, no color, no sound, no gravity. He was simply floating in pure brightness. It wasn't blinding, it was soft, like the inside of a dream where everything feels infinite. He felt weightless, peaceful, unafraid. He looked down but saw no floor, only swirls of light drifting beneath him like gentle clouds. He raised his hand again, watching the faint trails it left in the air, glowing lines that lingered for a moment before fading away. The light began to move now, flowing like water around him. It swirled in spirals, gathering behind him, ahead of him, all around. SpongeBob realized it was forming something, a tunnel of liquid color, stretching far into the distance, each surface shimmering like translucent glass. As SpongeBob drifted deeper into the glowing tunnel, he felt as though he was swimming through air made of music. Every tiny movement of his hands or feet created soft waves of light gold, blue, and rose that spread outward like sound ripples. The walls around him shimmered like translucent silk, always moving, always breathing. The portal wasn't empty. Tiny bubbles floated all around, hundreds of them, some large as pineapples, others as small as grains of sand. Each bubble seemed alive, spinning softly and pulsing with faint inner light. When SpongeBob floated near one, it would quiver, showing a faint image inside before drifting away. He reached out, brushing one gently with his fingertip. The bubble flashed, and for a second, SpongeBob saw something inside. Himself sitting at the Krusty Krab, smiling as he handed a Krabby Patty to a customer. It was gone a moment later, fading into mist. He gasped softly. "Are you memories?" he asked aloud, though no one was there to answer. His voice echoed faintly, bouncing through the endless corridor in shimmering waves. The sound itself seemed to transform into light, scattering into particles that joined the walls. The deeper he went, the quieter the world became. The hum of the portal grew softer, lower, like the heartbeat of the ocean. Every few seconds, a pulse of light would travel down the tunnel, illuminating its surface in slow motion, as if the whole place were breathing with him. The sense of direction disappeared. There was no up or down, no floor or ceiling, only floating, only calm. He flipped lightly in the weightless space, letting himself drift upside down for a moment. "Wow," he whispered. "I don't think even Sandy's inventions could make something this bubbly." He laughed softly at his own joke. But even that laugh sounded different here, stretched and slowed, turning into a kind of soft melody that blended into the portal's hum. The glow around him began to shift. What was once gold and turquoise now deepened into violet and indigo tones, like the colors of twilight underwater. The tunnel expanded, opening wider, revealing new shapes in the light spirals, arcs, and swirling ribbons of bubbles that seemed to weave together like threads of a dream. As SpongeBob floated closer, he noticed each ribbon was made up of countless smaller bubbles, millions of them, forming lines that extended into infinity. Some of the bubbles were perfectly clear, others had faint images flickering inside them. Jellyfish drifting in slow motion, seagrass swaying, Patrick waving clumsily at the camera. It felt like the entire ocean's memory had been captured inside this place. He reached toward one ribbon. It rippled at his touch, and a gentle vibration hummed through his fingertips. The air felt charged, but not dangerous. It was the kind of tingling you get when something magical is about to happen. Suddenly, the bubbles around him began to move faster. The current changed. He could feel the pull, subtle but steady, drawing him forward. He let it take him. As he drifted deeper, the tunnel started to narrow again, its light condensing into a single, shimmering path. Ahead, SpongeBob could see a bright sphere larger than the others rotating slowly in place. It glowed with the purest shade of blue he'd ever seen, the color of deep ocean light just before sunrise. Tiny trails of bubbles spiraled toward it, like stars orbiting a planet. The hum in the air grew deeper, resonating softly in his chest. He floated closer, heart beating with curiosity and awe. When he neared it, the sphere reacted. It began to ripple, sending waves of light outward in concentric rings. Each ripple passed through him like a soft breeze, filling him with warmth and calm. Then, as he reached out again, the sphere suddenly expanded, releasing a gentle burst of air and color. For an instant, everything went still, then the walls of the tunnel transformed. They became transparent. Now SpongeBob could see beyond the glowing corridor an infinite ocean of light-filled bubbles, stretching in every direction. Each one reflected the next, creating endless layers of mirrored worlds. The sight was breathtaking. It looked like the night sky turned inside out, with constellations made of water and reflection instead of stars. "Whoa! It's like the whole sea is dreaming," SpongeBob whispered, eyes wide in wonder. He twirled in the slow current, looking all around. Every movement created ripples that traveled outward, connecting one bubble to another. The connections pulsed with a soft rhythm, like an invisible heartbeat shared between them. And then, through the luminous haze, he saw something else, faint shapes moving inside the distant bubbles. One looked like Squidward, calmly playing his clarinet under moonlight. Another held Patrick, floating through the sky on a jellyfish balloon. Yet another showed Sandy meditating inside her dome, a small air bubble glowing near her helmet. SpongeBob's heart softened. "You're all here," he murmured, "even in my dreams." He smiled, gently spinning in place as he watched the glowing reflections of his friends. Each image shimmered for a moment before fading into the next, like waves passing through glass. The deeper he looked, the more he realized the bubbles weren't just showing memories. They were possibilities, futures that hadn't happened yet, moments that were waiting to be born. He could see himself waving from a tiny, crusty crab floating among clouds, or dancing through glowing coral fields under 1,000 stars. Every image felt both familiar and new, like déjà vu wrapped in light. For a moment, the wonder of it all was almost overwhelming, but the dream's calm nature kept him grounded, or perhaps afloat. He reached for another bubble drifting nearby. This one was smaller, delicate, and pale pink. When he touched it, it rippled open, and inside he saw something simple but beautiful. Himself and Gary napping by the window as bubbles floated past outside. The image made him giggle softly. Guess even in dreams, Gary's the real expert at relaxation, he said. Then, like a sigh, the bubble released its glow into the air and drifted upward, joining the millions above. Time, if time even existed here, seemed to stretch endlessly. SpongeBob didn't know how long he'd been floating, but it didn't matter. There was no hurry, no need to go anywhere. The portal world was timeless. Every second felt full yet soft, like music you could almost touch. The tunnel began to widen again, its glow brightening to gold. Ahead, another shimmering form started to take shape, this one circular, but framed with flowing lines that curved inward, almost like petals. It looked like another doorway. The hum around him changed lighter now, almost like a melody forming out of the air. Tiny bubbles gathered, aligning themselves into spiral shapes that glowed brighter the closer he came. SpongeBob slowed, hovering before it. The new portal pulsed like a living heart of light. He looked into its center and saw faintly a reflection of himself standing in his room again, reaching out toward the bubble. Everything connected. The bubble that appeared in his room was the same doorway he had entered, and beyond it was not just a tunnel, but a world that seemed to exist both inside and outside him. When SpongeBob opened his eyes again, he wasn't in the tunnel anymore. He was floating in what looked like a vast ocean made of mirrors, except that it wasn't water. The surface beneath him shimmered like liquid glass, perfectly still but always shifting, glowing faintly with pastel colors that changed with every breath. Pink, blue, gold, violet blending like spilled paint under moonlight. Above him, there was no sky, only an endless field of bubbles, drifting lazily through the air. Some were enormous, big enough to hold entire houses, while others were so tiny they looked like dust made of light. They moved in slow motion, forming invisible spirals and constellations, like stars in an underwater sky. SpongeBob blinked, his reflection multiplying across every direction. He could see 100 versions of himself smiling back, each from a slightly different angle. The effect made him dizzy, but he couldn't look away. It was like being surrounded by his own laughter, frozen in light. He slowly waved his hand. Every reflection waved back half a second later, as though the world itself was thinking before reacting. "Wow," he breathed, voice soft and echoing. "This must be what it's like inside a soap dream." He flipped backward in slow motion, giggling as he drifted through a cluster of floating bubbles. They tickled his face as he passed through them, leaving faint trails of glowing mist. The air smelled faintly of sea salt and vanilla, clean, sweet, familiar. For a while he simply floated there, watching the bubbles move. Each one carried faint images within it, fragments of places and moments. Some showed Bikini Bottom from afar, glowing gently like a memory. Others showed things he didn't recognize, coral forests made of crystal, glowing jellyfish that moved like ribbons, floating islands drifting in the current of light. He reached toward one large bubble nearby, curious. Its surface shimmered, and inside he saw something astonishing himself standing in front of the Krusty Krab. But the restaurant looked different. The building was made entirely of glass bubbles, with glowing jellyfish floating inside instead of lamps. He could even see tiny versions of himself and Squidward working behind a counter made of coral glass. When he blinked, the image shifted again. Now he was watching Patrick, wearing a small crown, sitting atop a giant ice cream cone that floated through the sky. Patrick waved lazily, grinning. "Hey, SpongeBob." His voice echoed softly from inside the bubble, like a memory of laughter carried by wind. SpongeBob giggled, pressing his palms against the bubble. "Hi, Patrick. You're in my dream again." The moment he said it, the bubble rippled and drifted away, vanishing into the mist. SpongeBob floated quietly for a moment, watching the trails of light fade. Then he realized something strange. He could feel a rhythm. Not a sound exactly, but a soft pulsing in the space around him, like the heartbeat of the dream itself. It wasn't fast or slow, just steady, comforting, like the ocean's breathing. He closed his eyes, letting it guide him. Each pulse seemed to move him forward, deeper into the glowing sea. The reflections around him began to change colors, deepening, bubbles glowing brighter. It was as if the dream were responding to his calm. Soon he found himself surrounded by floating pathways made entirely of bubbles, long curving bridges that rose and fell through the shimmering void. They stretched in every direction, connecting clusters of glowing orbs that looked like cities suspended in air. "Whoa," SpongeBob whispered, spinning slowly in place. "It's like a whole world made of bubbles." He floated closer to one of the bubble bridges, lightly stepping onto it. It didn't burst instead. It rippled gently under his feet, strong enough to hold him, but soft enough to move with every step. Each ripple sent out rings of glowing light that spread outward, echoing through the air like soft ripples in a pond. As he walked, he noticed something remarkable. The bubbles responded to his emotions. When he felt curious, they shimmered brighter, swirling with golden hues. When he smiled, they released faint chime-like sounds that harmonized with the background hum. Every thought, every breath seemed to leave an imprint on this world. He giggled again, skipping lightly along the bridge, watching the bubbles glow in rhythm with his footsteps. "This is amazing," he said aloud. "A place that listens when you smile." In the distance, a gentle wind began to blow, not cold, but cool enough to make the bubbles shimmer faster. Tiny trails of mist followed it, and with each passing moment, the reflections around him shifted once more. Now he could see massive bubble structures rising from the horizon, floating towers made of spirals, domes, and rings. They gleamed with pale light, like moonlit coral. Inside each tower, smaller bubbles drifted slowly upward, giving the illusion of movement, like the city itself was breathing. SpongeBob stood there in awe, hands clasped against his chest. "It's so beautiful. It's like every bubble here has its own dream." He walked closer, reaching one of the towers. As he approached, the bubbles nearest to him rippled, forming patterns not random, but recognizable. For a brief moment, he saw faces, smiling jellyfish, a silhouette of Sandy holding a book, even the faint outline of Gary's shell glowing softly. They faded quickly, replaced by swirls of light that formed new shapes. SpongeBob tilted his head. "I think it's showing me what I love most," he said softly, "like it remembers what makes me happy." The air around him vibrated gently, almost in agreement. He smiled wider. "Then I think I love you too, Bubble World." The world seemed to shimmer in response, bubbles flickering brighter, chimes sounding all around him. It felt like laughter, soft and joyful. He turned his gaze upward again. Far above, a giant orb floated, brighter than anything else, glowing like a second moon. It pulsed slowly, drawing faint trails of light toward it. SpongeBob squinted, mesmerized. "That's beautiful," he whispered. "I wonder what's inside." He began walking toward it, crossing another floating bridge that curved gently upward. As he climbed, the colors around him shifted again from soft pinks and blues to deeper violets and silvers, like he was walking into the edge of night. Tiny bubbles began to rise around him again, forming spirals that danced in the air. They hummed softly, their sound blending into something that almost resembled a song. It wasn't any tune he knew, but it felt familiar, like the rhythm of waves or the sound of wind through coral. He paused halfway up the bridge, looking around. "It's like the ocean is singing to me." For a long moment, SpongeBob just stood there, eyes wide, arms open, letting the sound wash over him. He felt calm, safe, and full of wonder all at once. Then, without realizing, his feet began to lift from the bridge, the bubbles beneath him rising, carrying him upward toward the glowing orb. He didn't struggle. He simply floated, arms spread like wings, laughter echoing softly as he drifted through the air, bathed in gentle light. Everything shimmered, every bubble, every reflection, as if the whole world was exhaling. And as he rose higher, the orb above him grew brighter, spinning slowly, its surface rippling like a living mirror. As SpongeBob floated closer to the glowing orb, he felt everything around him slowing down. The soft hum of the bubble bridges faded into silence. The drifting lights froze mid-motion, hanging like raindrops suspended in glass. Even the pulse of the world, that deep, gentle rhythm, grew quiet, as if holding its breath. The orb loomed before him, vast and luminous, its surface rippling with waves of silver and white. It wasn't just bright, it felt alive, as if it was watching him, waiting for him to arrive. SpongeBob reached out, fingers trembling slightly, and whispered, "Hello?" The moment his hand touched it, the surface of the orb rippled outward, and then he was pulled through. There was no force, no pain, only light. He drifted through a tunnel of shimmering reflections, watching fragments of his life swirl past him. Laughter with Patrick, jellyfishing under the pink skies of jellyfish fields, flipping Krabby Patties at the Krusty Krab, waving to Squidward every morning, feeding Gary before bedtime. Each memory glowed softly, surrounded by bubbles. Each one dissolved gently as he passed, leaving behind faint trails of sparkle. SpongeBob smiled faintly. It's all here," he whispered. "Everything I've ever loved." As he floated deeper, the light began to change. The golden glow turned soft blue, then white, then something beyond color, a brilliance that wasn't bright but felt infinite. And in that stillness, a voice seemed to echo all around him. Not words, exactly, just a feeling like warmth and kindness woven into sound. It said nothing he could repeat, but somehow he understood. "You are part of every bubble. Every dream remembers you." He blinked slowly, realizing what it meant. The world he'd entered wasn't just a place, it was a reflection of himself. His laughter, his kindness, his curiosity, they had shaped this dream. Every glowing bridge, every bubble city, every soft melody in the air existed because of what he carried in his heart. SpongeBob felt tears prick his eyes, though they shimmered into light before they could fall. "I didn't know. I made this place," he whispered. "All this time, it was me." The world around him pulsed in response, as though nodding. Bubbles began to gather near him, swirling gently in spirals. They moved closer, forming soft shapes, familiar ones. Patrick's smile, Sandy's goggles, Squidward's clarinet, Mr. Crab's laugh. Even Gary's meow echoed faintly in the distance. SpongeBob floated among them, hands outstretched. Each bubble that touched his fingertips sent a small burst of warmth through him. Memories reawakening like stars relit after dusk. He whispered softly, "Hi, everyone." The bubbles hummed back, not in voices, but in tones, like musical notes vibrating with joy. The melody was peaceful, wrapping around him like a lullaby. Then the light of the orb began to pulse faster, as if responding to the melody. The air shimmered, and the entire dream started to shift again, not collapsing, but transforming. The bubble bridges folded into the horizon. The glassy oceans turned into soft mist. The bubble cities faded into glimmers of light. Everything was returning to one merging into a single, vast, glowing sea of bubbles that surrounded SpongeBob in all directions. He spun slowly in the center, watching as the last fragments of the world swirled around him. It felt like a goodbye, but not a sad one, like saying farewell to a beautiful song that had finished playing. He whispered, "Thank you for showing me." For a moment he floated there still silent, small amid the endless glow. And then, just as softly, the light began to fade. The bubbles started to drift away, one by one, rising higher until they disappeared into the dark. The orb itself shimmered one last time before dissolving into mist, leaving only a faint glow around SpongeBob. The quiet that followed was absolute. No sound, no color, only calm. Then faintly he felt something beneath him. Soft fabric, warm light, a familiar smell of sea salt and pineapple. He blinked. He was back in his room. The glow of the bubble had vanished, but the faint scent of it still lingered in the air. His window curtains swayed gently, letting moonlight fall across his face. SpongeBob sat up slowly, looking around. His walls were normal again. The room was silent, except for the faint hum of jellyfish outside. He smiled softly, whispering to himself, "I think I was somewhere beautiful." He turned his gaze toward the corner of the room, the place where the bubble had first appeared. For a moment he thought he saw something shimmer, a tiny flicker, a reflection that wasn't from the lamp or window. A single small bubble floated there, glowing faintly. It drifted lazily upward, bumping against the ceiling, then popped with a soft plink. A single sparkle of light fell from where it had been and landed gently on SpongeBob's blanket. It shimmered once, then faded. SpongeBob lay back down, smiling. "Good night, little bubble." The moment SpongeBob opened his eyes again, he found himself surrounded by light, not bright or blinding, but soft and alive, as if color itself was breathing. He was floating gently, his body weightless. Around him, a tunnel of shimmering bubbles stretched endlessly in both directions, twisting and curving like a ribbon in slow motion. The walls weren't solid. They shimmered like soap film, reflecting entire worlds within their surfaces. Coral, sky, sea, and sometimes strange glowing shapes that dissolved before his eyes. He looked down. Beneath his feet, the floor was made of millions of tiny bubbles, stacked so perfectly that they looked like glass tiles. Each step he took made a faint plink sound, sending tiny ripples of light in all directions. SpongeBob blinked in wonder. "Wow, it's like a hallway made of rainbow water," he whispered, his voice echoing softly through the corridor. The echoes didn't fade instead. They floated, turning into soft trails of sound that hung in the air like strings of music. His words shimmered, curling into bubbles before vanishing. He laughed quietly. "I guess even my voice likes to float here." As he walked, or rather drifted forward, the corridor began to shift. The bubbles on the walls expanded and contracted like they were breathing. Some of them showed glimpses of places he knew: the Krusty Krab, jellyfish fields, his pineapple home, but they looked different, glowing faintly as though they existed in another time. He stopped in front of one glowing bubble and leaned closer. Inside it, he saw himself standing behind the grill at the Krusty Krab, flipping patties with a smile, the sizzling sound turning into soft chimes. The grease bubbles rose from the grill, floating into the ceiling like tiny planets. SpongeBob tilted his head. "Is that me from today or tomorrow?" The bubble pulsed once, almost as if answering. Then it popped silently, and a faint wave of light rippled down the corridor. SpongeBob stepped back, watching in amazement. Wherever the ripple touched, new bubbles appeared, floating up from the floor like rising lanterns. Each one contained a new image, a new reflection. Some showed moments he remembered: jellyfishing with Patrick, laughing until their nets tangled, walking to work while Squidward complained about noise pollution, hugging Gary after a long day. But others he didn't recognize. He saw places he'd never been: a castle made of sea glass, a forest of glowing coral, a tiny bubble city suspended in the current like a floating dream. SpongeBob's voice softened to a whisper. "Am I seeing someone else's dreams too?" The corridor shimmered brighter in response. A gentle hum began to rise from the walls, deep and melodic, the sound of the bubbles vibrating together. The colors of the corridor shifted, flowing like liquid light, blues melting into pinks, then purples, then silver. SpongeBob reached out and touched the wall again. The film beneath his hand rippled like silk. A faint pulse ran through his arm, not electric, but warm, like the feeling of sunlight on skin. He closed his eyes and listened. Somewhere beyond the walls he could hear faint laughter, a child's giggle, distant and happy. Then a familiar sound, Patrick's voice echoing faintly. "Hey, SpongeBob! Look! I made a bubble in the shape of a Krabby Patty." SpongeBob's eyes snapped open, heart skipping. "Patrick!" He looked around, spinning slowly in the glowing tunnel. The voice had come from somewhere behind him, or maybe inside the bubbles themselves. But there was no one there, only the endless, rippling corridor. He took a cautious step forward. "Patrick? Is that you?" A bubble drifted down in front of him, large and glowing faintly pink. Inside it, he saw Patrick's smiling face, distorted by the curve of the bubble's surface. He was sitting cross-legged under a field of jellyfish, holding a tiny, glowing jelly in his hands. SpongeBob gasped, pressing his hands against the bubble. "Patrick, you're here." The reflection looked up and waved cheerfully. But when SpongeBob tried to touch him, the bubble quivered and popped, releasing a soft chime that lingered in the air like perfume. He whispered, "Oh, you're just a memory." For a moment, the corridor dimmed slightly, not with sadness but stillness. The walls turned a deeper shade of blue, as though even the light was taking a slow breath. SpongeBob floated quietly, staring at where the bubble had been. "It's okay," he said softly. "Dreams can still be friends." He smiled, and as he did, the corridor brightened again. The walls shimmered with renewed light, and the floor bubbles began to move, gently carrying him forward like an invisible current leading him somewhere. SpongeBob let go, spreading his arms as he drifted through the glowing passage. The walls around him shifted faster now, showing more scenes, moments of laughter, flashes of color, brief glimpses of undersea wonders. The soundscape grew layers of faint harp strings and deep ocean tones blending together into something that felt both music and silence. As he floated deeper, the bubbles ahead began to merge, joining into larger spheres, each one pulsing faintly with its own color. They weren't memories anymore. They felt alive. Shapes moved within them, strange silhouettes that seemed curious but kind. He couldn't make out faces, only motion, like gentle creatures made of light. SpongeBob whispered in awe, "I think I'm not the only one dreaming here." One of the glowing bubbles floated near him and paused. Its surface shimmered silver blue, reflecting SpongeBob's face, and a faint outline of something behind him, a tall, gentle shape made of light, almost like a guardian. He turned quickly, but there was nothing there, only bubbles stretching forever. When he looked back, the silver bubble had floated upward, joining a stream of others heading toward the far end of the corridor, toward a soft white glow in the distance. SpongeBob took a deep breath and followed. He could feel it now. The corridor wasn't random. It was leading him somewhere. Every color, every shimmer, every echo of memory was pulling him toward that light. The further SpongeBob drifted, the more the bubble corridor began to change. The walls that once shimmered gently now pulsed like the ocean's heartbeat, deep, rhythmic, alive. Each pulse sent a wave of color cascading through the walls, pinks shifting into deep violets, then glowing turquoise, then soft gold. It was like drifting through a rainbow that breathed. He slowed his floating and looked around. The bubbles weren't just floating now, they were moving with purpose. Like schools of fish, they swirled around him in intricate spirals, forming patterns that dissolved into light and then reformed again. Some bubbles rose upward like glowing embers. Others drifted downward, vanishing into the floor like seeds sinking into sand. Each time one passed by him, it emitted a soft chime, different tones, forming a delicate melody in the air. SpongeBob placed a hand over his chest. "It's like the bubbles are talking." As he listened closer, the melody began to sound familiar. It was slow and tender, but within it, he recognized something, the same rhythm he used when humming while working at the Krusty Krab. The same little tune he'd hum without even realizing. His eyes widened. "Wait, that's my song." He floated in place, watching the bubbles swirl. Some of them pulsed in sync with his heartbeat. He could feel it. The corridor wasn't just a passage. It was listening to him, responding to his memories. A deep calm settled over him. He reached out toward a nearby bubble, its surface glowing faintly coral pink. Inside, he could just barely make out a scene: Patrick and himself sitting on the ground, eating ice cream cones that were melting far too fast. Both of them laughing, their faces sticky and happy. He chuckled softly. That was the day we tried to have an ice cream picnic. It didn't last long. The bubble rippled as if remembering with him, and a single droplet floated free, glowing faintly before dissolving into the air. SpongeBob's expression softened. "So you're not just showing me memories, you're sharing them." The corridor's hum deepened slightly, like a voice acknowledging him. For the first time since entering, SpongeBob didn't feel like he was drifting alone. He looked ahead. The corridor began to narrow, curling into a gentle spiral. The further he moved, the more the bubbles grew larger, until each one was big enough to hold him inside. Their surfaces shimmered like silver mirrors, and faint glows moved within them. Shapes and silhouettes he couldn't quite make out. He floated closer to one. Inside he saw a group of glowing jellyfish, pulsing softly like lanterns. They drifted around a familiar silhouette. Squidward, sitting on a rock, playing his clarinet. The tune echoed faintly through the corridor, as if the music existed both inside and outside the bubble. The sound was softer than he'd ever heard it. Not grumpy or sharp, but calm and slow, each note leaving a ripple in the air. SpongeBob smiled fondly. You're even happy in my dream, Squidward." The bubble's light flickered, as though responding. Oh, he drifted onward, passing another large bubble. Inside, Sandy floated among stars, her suit shining under the cosmic light. She looked peaceful, her helmet reflecting infinite galaxies. SpongeBob reached out toward a reflection. "She's always chasing the stars," he said softly, "even in dreams." The bubble glowed a little brighter, then faded as he moved past. The corridor began to expand again, this time into a vast dome made of countless bubbles, all stacked together like the inside of a living cathedral made of glass. Light streamed through from above, breaking into rainbow beams that filled the air with color. SpongeBob's mouth fell open. Whoa! Each beam illuminated bubbles that contained scenes both familiar and strange. One showed jellyfish fields under a golden sunset. Another showed SpongeBob's pineapple house surrounded by flowers made of coral. Another shimmered with silhouettes figures he couldn't quite recognize, maybe other sea creatures dreaming their own dreams. He floated gently toward the center of the dome. The air here, or whatever it was, felt different. Denser, warmer. Every breath he took seemed to hum with energy. Suddenly, the bubbles above began to tremble. At first it was soft, a faint vibration like a whisper of current. Then it grew, deepening to a resonant hum that filled the space. The bubbles on the walls started to spin slowly, aligning themselves into a spiral pattern that stretched upward into infinity. SpongeBob looked up in awe. The entire corridor had turned into a massive spiral of light. Each bubble within it shimmered brighter, forming what looked like a staircase of stars. The hum grew louder, harmonizing into a single tone that felt like it was calling him. SpongeBob pressed a hand over his chest again, feeling the beat of his heart matching the rhythm of the corridor. "It's calling me somewhere." The bubbles nearest to him began to glow golden, drifting toward the spiral center as if guiding him. Without thinking, he followed. The floor beneath him, or the bubbles that acted as a floor, rose and fell with each step like gentle waves. He floated upward through the spiral, surrounded by reflections of his own face. Each reflection shimmered differently, some happy, some thoughtful, some quiet. It felt strange but comforting, as though he was watching every version of himself that ever existed. SpongeBob who laughed, who cried, who dreamed, who doubted. He smiled softly. "Guess we've all been through a lot, huh?" The reflections smiled back. The light around him began to shift from gold to deep blue, not dark, but vast. The bubbles at the top of the spiral started to merge into one another, forming what looked like a glowing doorway, rippling and alive. It pulsed slowly, each beat sending waves of color down the spiral. SpongeBob stared up at it, feeling his heart swell with both excitement and calm. Whatever was beyond that door, it wasn't scary. It felt like the next part of the dream. He reached forward, his hand trembling slightly. But before he could touch it, the corridor spoke again, not with words, but with sound. A low hum vibrated through every bubble, forming tones that blended into something like a whisper. It wasn't English, but SpongeBob could feel its meaning in his chest. Not all doors open with touch. Some open when you remember. He blinked, whispering, "Remember?" The bubbles around him flickered, showing flashes of moments, him and Patrick building a sandcastle, him waving goodbye to Squidward at sunset, him blowing a bubble so big it carried him into the sky. Then he understood. Smiling gently, SpongeBob closed his eyes and whispered, "I remember being happy, laughing so hard my cheeks hurt, feeling alive." The light in the corridor flared not blinding but radiant. The spiral began to turn faster, the bubbles vibrating with joy. The bubbles began to move, not like drifting, but in patterns, slow spirals and streams, forming delicate pathways that shimmered like constellations. SpongeBob blinked in awe, realizing the bubbles were arranging themselves into a corridor. A gentle current tugged at him, pulling him along the glowing path. Each side of the corridor was lined with huge bubbles, their surfaces curved like mirrors of color. Inside them were scenes, tiny and soft, like memories caught in floating glass. One showed SpongeBob making a Krabby Patty. Another showed him laughing with Patrick. Another of him learning karate with Sandy. As he floated deeper, the colors shifted from pinks and yellows to deeper blues and violets. The corridor darkened slightly, but the light from the bubbles glowed stronger, guiding him like a string of stars. He touched one gently. It rippled, releasing faint music that sounded like laughter turned into melody. The walls of the corridor were alive, shimmering with bubbles that pulsed to the rhythm of SpongeBob's slow breathing. It felt calm, but not empty. Every bubble whispered faintly, voices echoing like old friends speaking across the sea. He drifted closer to one bubble inside. He saw Gary curled up in his shell, softly asleep. SpongeBob smiled warmly. "Good night, buddy," he whispered. The bubble trembled, glowing brighter for a moment, then stilled again. As he moved onward, SpongeBob noticed that the corridor curved gently upward, like a staircase made of light. He swam a little faster, curiosity flickering in his eyes. The bubbles along the walls seemed to react, changing shape, forming faint outlines of hands, eyes, and gentle smiles. They weren't just showing him things, they were watching him too. The sound design here deepens, a mix of soft, bubbling, low humming tones, and faint harp strings that ripple through the background. The ocean feels infinite, but comforting, like the dream itself is alive and welcoming. Then suddenly a shimmer of light passed through all the bubbles at once, like a wave of reflection. The entire corridor blinked, and for a moment, SpongeBob saw something beyond, a vast opening, a bright pulse of white-blue light at the end of the tunnel. He gasped softly. The air or water around him felt different now, thicker and warmer, humming gently with energy. Every bubble reflected that same light, each one containing a smaller, spinning version of it. It was like he was traveling through an endless reflection of a single, beautiful point. He swam forward again, slower this time. As he moved, the walls of bubbles began to sing, not in words, but in tones, each one releasing a soft note when he passed by. Together they formed harmonies that rose and fell like ocean waves. It wasn't loud, but it filled the space with emotion, peaceful, nostalgic, almost holy. SpongeBob reached out, letting his fingers trail across the surface of one singing bubble. Ripples formed instantly, creating concentric circles that spread outward. Every time they crossed another bubble, that bubble's note shifted slightly, changing the melody. He realized the song changed with him. The corridor was playing his presence. He whispered to himself, "It's like it's listening." The further he went, the more intricate the shapes became. The bubbles started joining together, not just floating, but weaving around each other like ribbons of glass. Some spiraled into archways, others clustered into what looked like jellyfish made of light. SpongeBob laughed softly in wonder, his voice echoing gently through the corridor. His laughter caused nearby bubbles to shimmer gold for a moment, then fade back into soft blue. The floor beneath him, if there was a floor, turned transparent, showing layers of drifting bubbles beneath each one spinning slowly, like the reflections of a dream. Some looked like ocean waves frozen mid-motion. others like giant eyes of light looking upward through infinity. SpongeBob drifted slowly, turning around to see the corridor behind him. The path shimmered faintly, fading into the distance like a trail of starlight. It didn't look like something built, more like something alive, growing with every motion. For a few moments, he just floated there, suspended in a weightless calm. His reflection multiplied infinitely in every direction, dozens of tiny SpongeBobs waving, smiling, and fading into mist. Then from far ahead, a faint glow pulse rippled through the corridor. It wasn't threatening, more like a heartbeat, slow and rhythmic. Each pulse caused the bubbles to expand slightly, then shrink, like the corridor was breathing. The light ahead flickered again, and this time, SpongeBob saw faint shapes moving within it. He couldn't make out details yet, but they shimmered like silhouettes made of light and memory. The camera slowly pans in front of him now, a cinematic 180 degrees rotation, showing SpongeBob's awestruck face illuminated by thousands of reflections. His eyes glisten with wonder, glow reflected in tiny white stars across his pupils. A faint trail of smaller bubbles escapes his mouth as he whispers, "Is someone there?" The glowing figures at the corridor's end begin to take form outlines of jellyfish, softly pulsing with pink light. They drift closer, their tendrils glowing gently. The light they emit ripples across the bubbles, creating fractal patterns of pink and cayenne. They move gracefully around SpongeBob, circling him like guardians of the passage. Their movements are slow, almost choreographed, like a dance of peace. The air, or water, vibrates softly as they hum, blending perfectly with the corridor's melody. One jellyfish drifts closer to him, glowing a little brighter than the others. SpongeBob reaches out a cautious hand, and when he touches it, the jellyfish pulses a golden light that spreads instantly through the corridor. The bubbles react all at once, the walls glow brighter, the music swells gently, and for a moment, the corridor turns into something magnificent, a river of living stars. The jellyfish then drifts upward, leaving behind a thin trail of golden light that fades slowly. The others follow, and SpongeBob looks after them, eyes wide, heart full. He whispers softly, "Thank you," as their glow fades into the horizon. Then he looks forward again. The corridor narrows, a sign that this dream path is about to change. The bubbles along the walls flatten slightly, creating a doorway of light ahead. He feels the pull again, gentle but steady. The hum deepens, the music quiets, and everything slows. The camera angle widens, showing SpongeBob's small figure surrounded by the endless glowing tunnel, his outlines slowly drifting toward the next dream world beyond. As SpongeBob crossed the final threshold of the glowing corridor, the world around him softened into stillness. The bubbles slowed their drifting. The colors dimmed from bright blues to pale silvers. The sound of the hum lowered into a deep ocean-like rhythm, the kind that feels more like a heartbeat than a sound. The long, endless hallway of bubbles began to change shape. The walls folded inward slightly, as if bowing in farewell. Each bubble released a faint glimmer, like small fireflies blinking goodbye. SpongeBob turned slowly, watching as the corridor behind him began to fade. Not disappear, but dissolve into tiny fragments of light that floated upward like glowing dust. He whispered, "Thank you," under his breath. It wasn't clear who he was thanking, the bubbles, the dream, or the feeling itself, but the corridor seemed to respond. A faint wave of warmth spread through the water, surrounding him in golden shimmer. The light ahead grew softer now, not blinding or intense, but welcoming, like the first light of morning through ocean mist. SpongeBob floated toward it carefully, his arms relaxed, his body weightless in the dream current. Each movement caused ripples through the bubble walls, and in each ripple, faint shapes appeared memories again, but not his alone this time. He saw flashes of jellyfish floating across meadows of coral, a school of fish laughing in circles, even a young SpongeBob blowing his very first bubble. Each vision shimmered for a moment, then faded, leaving behind a trace of light that joined the rest. He realized something then. This corridor wasn't just made of bubbles. It was made of moments. Every bubble was a captured second, a fragment of joy or laughter that refused to fade. The entire path was built from the happy, quiet pieces of life that lived inside him. He smiled softly, whispering, "So this is what dreams are made of." As he spoke, the bubbles around him pulsed gently, like they understood. The light grew warmer, soft orange tones blending with blues, like a sunset blooming under the sea. The camera drifts around SpongeBob in a slow circle, catching reflections of his face in the curved bubbles, dozens of versions of him, smiling, blinking, breathing. It's calm, mesmerizing. The corridor begins to widen. The bubbles thin out until there's more open space between them. SpongeBob drifts higher, tilting his head upward as a faint current guides him. The hum becomes faint, replaced by a soft, crystalline sound like wind chimes made of water. Above him, the bubbles arrange themselves into a spiraling path, leading upward like a staircase made of stars. SpongeBob's eyes widen as he realizes it's leading to something, a vast, circular opening glowing far above. The edges shimmer like liquid light, endlessly spinning. He begins to swim toward it, each motion slow and graceful. As he does, the bubbles along the spiral begin to light up one by one like candles being lit in sequence. The light spreads upward in rhythm with his movement, illuminating his path like a trail of magic. Halfway up, SpongeBob pauses. He turns to look back. The entire corridor glows faintly below him, stretching endlessly into the distance, alive with memory and warmth. He realizes that everything he's seen, all the reflections, the songs, the bubbles, has been part of something much bigger than himself. A soft voice, maybe his own, echoes through the water. Every bubble's a memory, and every memory floats forever. He smiles again. His reflection in a nearby bubble smiles back, fading gently as he continues upward. Now the air grows brighter, almost white. The spiral ends at a great circular bubble, enormous and shimmering like a portal. Inside, SpongeBob can see shifting colors, pink, cayenne, gold flowing like clouds of dreamlight. He reaches out a hand and touches its surface. The bubble ripples, sending a wave of energy outward that lights up the entire corridor one last time. Every bubble responds, glowing in unison, humming in harmony, a chorus of light and sound. It's not loud. It's beautiful. The harmony carries emotion, warmth, and peace. The light dances across SpongeBob's face as he laughs softly, his eyes filled with wonder. Then silence. The hum fades. The glow stabilizes. The massive bubble before him opens slightly like a doorway made of liquid glass. Beyond it he can see a world, a new one. Shapes and colors blur within it. Vast fields of bubbles, floating cities of light, and rivers that shine like mirrors. The dream world beyond the portal pulses softly, waiting. SpongeBob takes a slow, deep breath, a breath that sounds more like awe than air. His voice is a whisper now. Okay, here I go. He steps, or floats, forward. The inside on his hand passes through the portal. The entire surface lights up with ripples. The ripples grow, spreading faster, circling around the bubble corridor like waves of gold and blue. As his body moves through, the portal emits one long resonant tone, low and soft, vibrating through the ocean. The corridor responds. Each bubble begins to pop silently, one by one, turning into light dust. The popping isn't chaotic, it's rhythmic, like the closing notes of a song. SpongeBob's reflection appears one last time in a nearby bubble. He looks calm, peaceful eyes closed, a faint smile on his face. The reflection fades as he passes through completely. Now the camera slowly pans back, showing the entire corridor collapsing into gentle waves of light. The bubbles disintegrate into sparkles, swirling together until all that's left is a single glowing point where the portal had been. The point pulses once, twice, and then fades into the darkness of the deep ocean. Silence follows. Only faint particles drift upward through the black, tiny, glowing fragments of bubbles, moving like fireflies returning to the stars. Then a final image, a single, small bubble floats up from the distance, glowing faintly in the dark. It drifts toward the camera, reflecting a tiny, sleeping SpongeBob within it. The light inside flickers once, twice, and then the bubble pops. Everything goes still. The world shimmered into focus again, soft and silent, like dawn breaking beneath the sea. SpongeBob drifted weightlessly through the afterglow of the corridor, where the last echoes of the bubble lights had dissolved into gentle sparkles. The hum was gone now, replaced by something slower, deeper. It wasn't silence. It was the sound of calm itself. He blinked, his eyes adjusting to the dim, silvery light around him. For a moment he thought he was floating through empty space, but then the darkness shifted. Shapes began to appear, faint and circular, suspended all around him. Bubbles. But these were different. They weren't glowing or floating randomly like before. Each one was larger, more still, and their surfaces reflected not light but images. They hung in a wide, open expanse like glass lanterns in a midnight hall, arranged in slow-moving clusters. SpongeBob turned slowly in awe. Wow, it's like a whole room of mirrors. His voice echoed faintly, caught in the soft liquid air. The sound rippled across the nearest bubble, distorting the reflection. For just a second he saw himself a faint, watery version of SpongeBob, eyes wide, mouth open in wonder. But then, as he drifted closer, the reflection began to change. It wasn't him anymore. It was someone else, Patrick. The image showed him standing on a sunny jellyfish field, holding a net too big for his arms. The scene shimmered, then replayed Patrick laughing as he tripped and fell into a pile of jellyfish. SpongeBob giggled instinctively, the sound bubbling out of him like air. "Patrick?" he said softly, reaching toward the bubble. His hand pressed against its surface, and the image rippled like water disturbed by touch. The laughter inside became clearer for a moment, and then faded back into silence. He pulled his hand away slowly, smiling. It's like a memory, but living inside the bubble. The realization struck him with a warm wave of emotion. Every bubble around him wasn't just a reflection. It was a moment, a captured fragment of life, still floating, still glowing. He drifted toward another one nearby, a smaller bubble, glowing faintly gold. Inside, he saw Squidward sitting under a lamppost at night, playing his clarinet. The music in the reflection rippled across the surface, soft and soulful. Even though the sound didn't reach him, SpongeBob could feel it, the rhythm, the loneliness, the quiet beauty of it. He pressed closer, eyes wide, completely absorbed. "Squidward, you always sound better in my dreams," he whispered gently. The bubbles shimmered in response, releasing a faint trail of smaller bubbles that floated upward like musical notes. One drifted toward SpongeBob's face, brushing against his cheek before floating past him. When it popped, it released a faint sparkle that melted into the water. Everywhere he looked now, there were bubbles, hundreds of them, each one holding a scene. Some were clear, showing his friends in moments of joy. Sandy building an invention that shined with light. Mr. Krabs holding a golden coin up to the sun. Gary sleeping soundly, his shell faintly glowing. Others were misty, less clear as if the memories inside were old or fading. SpongeBob floated slowly among them, touching each one with care, his movements gentle so as not to disturb them too much. The camera followed from behind a wide, drifting shot as SpongeBob moved through a vast space of memories. Bubbles reflected on his face like faint constellations, creating a halo of light around his silhouette. Soft piano notes began to play in the background, slow, nostalgic, echoing faintly through the dream ocean. He stopped beside a particularly large bubble that hovered alone in the center. Its surface shimmered like a moon. He floated closer, his eyes squinting as the image within came into focus. It was him, a much younger SpongeBob, standing in front of the Krusty Krab for the first time, holding his spatula proudly in the air. The sun was shining. The world felt alive. SpongeBob's younger self was smiling so brightly, it almost made him tear up. "Oh, that was my first day," he whispered, a soft laugh escaping his lips. "I remember. I was so nervous I burned 10 patties in a row." As he laughed, the reflection of his younger self waved back just once before fading into a gentle sparkle. SpongeBob blinked, his smile trembling for a second. The moment had been short, but it had been perfect. He realized something deeper now. These weren't just his memories. They were reflections of feeling. The bubbles didn't just show what had happened. They showed how it felt. The warmth, the laughter, the innocence, it all lived inside the light. As he floated on, he began to see other kinds of bubbles, too. Some held moments of quiet, sitting alone at night reading a book, feeding Gary, watching the rain fall outside his window. Others showed times he'd been sad when a Krabby Patty fell apart, or when he thought his friends were angry with him. But even those bubbles shimmered softly, not in sorrow, but in peace, as if the dream itself had washed away the sadness, leaving behind only the beauty of remembering. SpongeBob whispered, "It's like the ocean keeps everything, even the small things." The bubbles around him pulsed faintly in agreement, a synchronized flicker of light that filled the space with gentle warmth. Then he noticed something unusual. Among the sea of glowing orbs, one bubble wasn't shining. It hovered lower than the others, its surface dull, its color faint gray. Curious, SpongeBob drifted toward it, lowering himself through the soft current. When he reached it, he could barely see his reflection inside. The bubble's surface was cloudy, trembling faintly. He placed his hand against it, and suddenly it cleared. Inside, he saw himself sitting alone in his pineapple home, holding a half-deflated bubble wand. The light in the room was dim. He remembered that day, the day his bubble tricks hadn't worked, and no one had come to watch. The reflection of that SpongeBob looked up, sad but calm, and gave a small, knowing smile. SpongeBob's voice softened. Even that was still a good day. The bubble flickered gently and then, like all the others, began to glow faintly. The gray faded into soft pink light, and the bubble drifted upward to join the others. He watched it go with a quiet smile. See? Every bubble deserves to shine. The bubbles above shimmered again, brighter now, as if celebrating the thought. The camera zoomed out slowly, showing SpongeBob floating in the center of hundreds of glowing spheres, all reflecting light in every direction. The reflections overlapped, creating an infinite illusion of movement, each bubble holding a piece of his heart, each one gently breathing with light. The dreamscape was silent, except for the faint hum, like a lullaby, played by the sea itself. SpongeBob closed his eyes for a moment, letting the peace of it wash through him. His thoughts slowed, and his smile softened. This was no longer a place he was passing through. This was a place that belonged to him. The bubbles around SpongeBob drifted like slow-moving stars, each one shimmering in soft gradients of silver and violet. He floated quietly between them, his reflection bending across every curved surface. It felt endless, a quiet gallery suspended in light and memory. One particularly large bubble hovered before him, pulsing gently with a golden glow. It was different from the others, warmer, steadier, as though it remembered something long before SpongeBob even looked. He reached toward it carefully, his fingertips leaving faint ripples of light on its surface. Inside, the colors began to swirl until an image appeared. The Krusty Krab. SpongeBob's eyes widened slightly. He could see himself inside, wearing his familiar hat, flipping Krabby Patties with perfect rhythm. Grease bubbles sizzled. The bell over the counter rang softly, and Mr. Krabs shouted orders from the kitchen doorway. It was busy, bright, full of sound, but oddly distant. He smiled faintly. "That's me," he said to himself, his voice echoing softly in the empty air. "That's how I remember it." The scene shimmered again. This time it zoomed in closer to the moment. He handed a perfect patty to a little fish customer. The fish smiled gratefully, and SpongeBob's eyes in the memory gleamed with joy. Watching it now from the strange bubble realm, he could feel the happiness, like it was happening again. But then something shifted. The image flickered, rippled, and changed. Now he saw the Krusty Krab at closing time. The lights dimmed, the tables empty. He was sitting alone at a booth, staring at the closed sign through the window. It wasn't sad, just quiet, peaceful in a way. The bubble's glow dimmed slightly, matching the soft melancholy of the scene. SpongeBob tilted his head. "Even the quiet times are memories too," he murmured. "The ones no one else sees." The bubble shimmered and dissolved into smaller orbs that floated upward and disappeared. He drifted forward, surrounded now by hundreds of bubbles glowing in different hues. Each one pulsed like a heartbeat. Inside them, moments from his life played silently. Jellyfishing with Patrick, sitting in Sandy's dome learning science, delivering mail with Squidward on a rainy day. None of it felt far away. Every scene was alive, breathing softly in light. SpongeBob reached out and touched another bubble. It was smaller, faintly blue, glowing with soft ripples like moonlight on water. When it cleared, he saw his childhood, a tiny version of himself holding his first spatula. His eyes sparkled with excitement. His laugh echoed faintly through the air. The older SpongeBob chuckled, gently whispering, "I remember that day. I thought being a fry cook was the most magical thing in the world." The younger version of him in the memory looked straight up, as if he could somehow see his older self, and smiled. It was so real, so pure, that SpongeBob's eyes softened. "And it still is," he said quietly. The bubble rippled, expanding outward in slow motion, and suddenly he was surrounded by the glow of hundreds of little reflections, each one showing the faces of his friends. Patrick's goofy grin, Sandy's determined eyes, Squidward's half-smile hidden behind his clarinet, Gary's soft, blinking expression. They appeared like constellations in a sea of glass. "Everyone's part of this dream," SpongeBob whispered. His voice seemed to float, echoing gently through the endless corridor of light. Every bubble is someone I love. The world around him seemed to hum in response. The ocean currents shifted, carrying him slowly through the glowing field of memories. He floated past a massive bubble, almost as big as his pineapple house. Inside it, he saw himself sitting at home during a quiet evening, reading a book, feeding Gary, humming a tune. The room looked so warm, so peaceful. He touched the surface again. "Even when I'm alone," he said softly. "I guess I'm never really alone, because all these moments stay with me." The reflection shimmered brighter. The version of himself inside the bubble looked up and smiled directly at him. Not a mirror smile, but one filled with knowing warmth, like the dream itself was nodding in agreement. Then the image faded, replaced by a swirl of light that wrapped gently around SpongeBob like a slow-moving current. He let himself float, his arms spread wide. The bubbles continued to drift in graceful arcs like planets orbiting an invisible sun. Their reflections moved over his face, painting it with soft hues, pink, blue, golden. Each flash of color carried another memory, laughter, music, friends, even silence. And in that silence, SpongeBob began to understand something deeper. These weren't just reflections of what happened. They were the essence of how those moments felt. The joy of discovery, the calm of friendship, the peace of knowing he belonged somewhere. He whispered to the still air, "I think the bubbles remember us better than we remember ourselves." For a moment, everything stopped. The currents paused, the lights dimmed slightly, and all the bubbles seemed to hold their breath as if they were listening. Then, one by one, they began to glow softly again, in rhythm with SpongeBob's heartbeat. It was quiet, but not empty. Peaceful, but full of life. SpongeBob smiled that familiar, bright, gentle smile and continued to drift forward. His reflection followed him in every bubble, multiplying infinitely until he looked like 1,000 tiny versions of himself floating across the dream horizon. The space ahead began to open up, the glow turning a little cooler, hints of turquoise and deep blue mixing into the light. The path before him rippled like a mirror waiting to reveal its next memory. SpongeBob exhaled slowly, the sound like a soft sigh underwater. "Okay," he whispered. "Let's see where this dream goes next." The light around him deepened, and the bubbles began to spin slowly in a spiral, guiding him toward another glimmering shape far in the distance, a bubble larger than all the rest, pulsing gently, like a heartbeat in the ocean. SpongeBob floated slowly toward the massive bubble pulsing in the distance. It shimmered in layered hues, soft amber, lilac, and pearl white, as if it contained not one image, but an entire world folded inside. The current around him began to swirl, pulling him closer, though not forcefully. It was a gentle invitation, like a memory asking to be remembered. When he reached the bubble, it towered over him like a glowing dome. The surface rippled in patterns of light, and faint echoes hummed from within. He placed his hand against it again, but this time the bubble didn't just show a reflection. It opened. The surface expanded outward like liquid silk, and SpongeBob found himself gently drawn inside. Suddenly he was standing or floating in a familiar place. The air had that comforting scent of seawater and fried kelp. The Krusty Krab again, but different. It wasn't bustling or loud. Everything moved in slow motion, dreamlike. The tables gleamed softly. The grills shimmered with warm gold light. He turned, expecting to see Mr. Krabs or Squidward, but instead he saw himself. Another SpongeBob stood behind the counter, working quietly. He was humming a little tune, flipping patties with precise grace. But his eyes, they glowed faintly, reflecting the same light, that filled the bubble realm. SpongeBob blinked. Hi?" he said softly, unsure if this reflection could hear him. The other SpongeBob stopped, turned, and smiled. "You made it," he said, his voice calm and echoing faintly like it came from everywhere at once. "Made it? Made it where?" SpongeBob asked, tilting his head. The reflection chuckled lightly, the same way SpongeBob sometimes laughed when he understood something deep down. "You've been floating through your own memory, SpongeBob. Every bubble you touched, every reflection, it wasn't just a scene from your life. It was your heart showing you what it's made of." SpongeBob's eyes widened, and he looked around. The walls of the Krusty Krab now shimmered like the inside of a pearl. "My heart?" he asked softly. The reflection nodded. "You see, each bubble here is something you kept alive inside: laughter, kindness, even sadness. You're not just remembering them. You're living them again, to remind yourself of who you are." SpongeBob floated closer, curiosity shining in his eyes. "So, this place, this whole bubble world, it's all me?" The reflection smiled. "Part of you. The gentle part that dreams when you sleep. The one that remembers even when you forget." SpongeBob looked down at his hand, shimmering faintly with golden light. "That's, kind of beautiful." The other SpongeBob nodded. "It is, and it's fragile, too. That's why the bubbles shimmer, because memories aren't meant to be held too tightly. They glow brightest when you let them float." As those words sank in, the room around them began to shift again. The Krusty Krab melted away like paint dissolving in water. The walls turned to flowing ribbons of color, swirling softly. The reflection of SpongeBob began to drift upward, his form slowly turning transparent. "Wait," SpongeBob called. "Where are you going?" The reflection smiled faintly. "I'm not going anywhere, you are. There's more to see, more to remember." Before SpongeBob could reply, the light folded over him, and he found himself floating once again in the open corridor of bubbles. But now the colors were deeper, richer, like the memory world had matured somehow. The bubbles around him glowed with a steady rhythm, and faint sounds echoed from within them: laughter, voices, even ocean waves. SpongeBob drifted between them, feeling an overwhelming calm settle over him. He reached toward one smaller, glowing faint pink, and saw himself and Patrick sitting on top of a rock, blowing bubbles together. The scene looped Patrick laughing so hard his bubble wand bent in half, SpongeBob trying to fix it with a serious face that only made Patrick laugh harder. SpongeBob smiled softly. "Patrick," he whispered. He reached another bubble. Inside was Sandy, showing him a new invention, a bubble-powered glider. The two of them zoomed through the water, laughing uncontrollably, before crashing into a coral bush. The bubbles shimmered with the same mixture of excitement and chaos. He laughed quietly. Even the crashes were fun. As he floated further, the bubbles became smaller and more numerous, each one flickering with tiny glimpses. Squidward reading in peace, Gary chasing a snail treat, Mrs. Puff smiling as SpongeBob finally passed a driving test. Each moment blinked in and out of view like soft sparks of memory. Then, without warning, all the bubbles dimmed, not darkly, but gently, like candles lowering their light. The water around him grew very still. Ahead, one final bubble glowed larger than all the others, bright but calm. Its light had a subtle rhythm, almost like breathing. SpongeBob approached slowly, heart fluttering. As he got closer, he realized what it was showing. It wasn't the Krusty Krab or his pineapple or jellyfish fields. It was just him sitting on the ocean floor, eyes closed, surrounded by quiet. No laughter, no noise, just peace. He tilted his head. "That's, me doing nothing." But as he watched closer, he understood. The version of himself inside the bubble was at peace, not bored or restless, but still. A calm that came from knowing everything was okay, even without excitement or achievement. The memory version of SpongeBob opened his eyes and looked directly at him. "Do you see now?" the reflection asked gently. SpongeBob blinked. "See what?" "That every moment, busy or quiet, happy or sad, makes the ocean inside you whole. You've been chasing bubbles your whole life, SpongeBob, but even when they pop, the light stays." The words lingered in the water like music. SpongeBob felt warmth spreading through his chest, not fiery or intense, but steady. He looked around one last time at all the bubbles surrounding him. Some were fading, some were glowing brighter. They no longer felt like fragile glass, but like living stars, the essence of everything he had ever cared about. He smiled. "Then I guess I don't need to hold on to them. I just have to remember to feel them." The final bubble pulsed once more, brighter now, until it burst silently, sending a wave of golden ripples through the entire corridor. Each smaller bubble reacted, glowing briefly before slowly floating upward, one by one, into the darkness above. SpongeBob watched, feeling neither loss nor sadness, only calm. The bubbles were leaving, yes, but they weren't gone. They were becoming part of the sea again, the same sea that held him, the same current that carried every dream forward. He turned upward and began to drift after them, slowly ascending through the soft glow. His reflection stretched below him, then faded into light. As he floated higher, the last bits of shimmer surrounded him, the final remnants of memory light. They danced around him gently as though saying goodbye. The ocean of light shimmered around SpongeBob as he drifted upward through what felt like an infinite calm. The colors slowly faded from gold to soft blue, then to silver. Every direction looked endless, as if he were floating inside a memory that had no edges, no ceiling, only a heart that kept glowing quietly. For a long while, he didn't move. He just floated, breathing softly, watching smaller bubbles drift by like glowing snowflakes. Each one popped gently, leaving behind ripples that sounded like distant laughter. It wasn't loud or bright anymore. It was peaceful, like the world itself was whispering goodnight. Then, as if guided by that silence, another scene began to form. It wasn't like the others, no bright reflections, no swirl of emotion. This time, the water around him simply cleared. A faint outline appeared ahead, rectangular, gentle in glow, like a frame made of moonlight. Inside the frame, he saw his pineapple home. Warm, cozy light glowed through the windows. The clock on his bedside table ticked softly. Gary lay curled up in his shell bed, purring faintly. Everything looked exactly the same, yet SpongeBob could feel the difference. The air of memory was thinner now, like he was seeing it from far away. He floated closer. Through the window, he saw himself, the real SpongeBob, asleep under his blanket, face relaxed, a tiny smile playing on his lips. The version floating in the dream stared in awe. For the first time, he realized he wasn't just exploring a dream, he was exploring inside his own heart. He pressed his hand softly against the invisible glass, separating him from that peaceful scene. It didn't resist or ripple. It simply glowed beneath his touch, forming rings of light that spread outward like tiny tides. The dream SpongeBob whispered, "You're still there, safe." His voice trembled, but not from fear, from gratitude. As he watched himself sleep, flashes of memories drifted past in slow, glowing waves. The first Krabby Patty he ever flipped, the jellyfish fields at sunset, Patrick's contagious laugh, Squidward's faint smile after a perfect clarinet note, Sandy's warm hug before leaving for Texas. They moved like petals through water, each one soft, bright, and free. He realized then that every reflection, every glowing scene he had seen this strange realm, wasn't meant to be understood like a puzzle. It was meant to be felt. It was his dream telling him something he already knew deep down, that joy and kindness always leave light behind, even in the quietest corners of memory. A faint hum filled the water. It wasn't music exactly, more like the sound of all those memories blending together. The vibration traveled through his chest, gentle but steady, until he felt it in every part of him. His body began to glow again, faint outlines of bubbles drifting from his fingertips like breath. They floated away, merging with the current, joining the stars of his own past. Then he heard a voice soft as coral sand. "SpongeBob." He turned. The voice came from the shimmer itself. For a moment, the light formed a figure not solid, but shaped from the same glow that made the bubbles. It looked like no one and everyone at once, a reflection of every friend, every smile, every bond that shaped him. "Who are you?" SpongeBob whispered. The figure's outline pulsed gently. "I'm what's left behind when joy becomes memory. You made me every laugh, every act of kindness, every night you dreamed of your friends. I am your reflection, not of what you see, but of what you feel." SpongeBob blinked slowly, his expression softening. "So all of this, the bubbles, the corridors, the reflections, they were never separate from me?" The glowing figure nodded. "They are you, SpongeBob. Every memory you loved enough to keep alive became light. You entered your own heart to remember how infinite it truly is." The realization made SpongeBob's eyes glisten. He smiled, faintly embarrassed. "I guess my heart's a little bubbly." The figure laughed softly, the kind of sound that warmed the water. "And that's what makes it beautiful." The figure began to fade, becoming smaller until it dissolved completely, leaving only a glowing trail that curved upward like a path. The bubbles around SpongeBob aligned one after another, forming a soft spiral staircase made of shimmering light. Each step pulsed gently, waiting. SpongeBob looked upward. "Guess it's time to move on," he said with a peaceful grin. "Wherever on is." He began to ascend. With each step, the water grew lighter. The weight of memory drifted away, not as if he were forgetting, but as though he were freeing them to float. His body shimmered faintly. Even his square edges seemed to soften in the glow. As he climbed higher, the corridor below dimmed slowly, until only faint specks of light remained, tiny reminders of the bubbles that once floated there. Above him, a faint circular glow appeared, swirling gently like the surface of a bubble waiting to burst. Its light was neither blinding nor dim. It was calm, inviting, like the moon reflected on calm seas. He reached out. The instant his hand touched it, everything froze: the water, the bubbles, even time itself. His reflection appeared one last time in front of him, not the dream reflection, not the glowing figure, but simply himself, smiling in pure contentment. The reflection spoke softly, barely above a whisper. "Don't forget, the light was never in the bubbles. It was always in you." And then the surface gave way. He drifted through it, not falling, not rising, but becoming still. The scene turned pure white, sound dissolving into silence. For a moment, there was nothing but light and the gentle pulse of calm, like the heartbeat of the sea itself. Then fade in. SpongeBob lying in his bed, the night lamp softly flickering. His eyes fluttered open. For a moment he didn't move. The room was quiet except for Gary's faint purring. The glow from the lamp shimmered across the walls, reflecting softly through tiny air bubbles rising in the water. He smiled not wide, but gently, knowingly. SpongeBob whispered to himself, I think, I just saw the inside of a dream made of memories." He turned slightly, hugging his pillow. "Thanks. Bubbles," he murmured sleepily, his eyes closing once more. Outside the pineapple, a faint glowing bubble drifted upward from his window, small, delicate, yet filled with soft golden light. It floated through the quiet ocean streets, passing by the Krusty Krab, the chum bucket, jellyfish fields, until it rose high above Bikini Bottom, where the sea met the shimmer of the moonlight. At first, SpongeBob felt weightless, not floating upward or downward, but simply existing in a space without edges. The water here didn't move the way normal water did. It shimmered, pulsed, and whispered, like a living tide made of glass. Every inch of it was alive with motion. Billions of tiny bubbles, swirling like constellations, forming waves that breathed. He blinked slowly, trying to understand. The scene before him unfolded like a living dream, an ocean made entirely of bubbles. Waves rolled in slow motion, their crests not foamy white, but glowing silver blue, each one lined with orbs that glimmered like stars. There was no sand, no surface, no sky, only layers upon layers of floating light, rippling endlessly through the deep. SpongeBob reached out, and his hand disappeared into one of the waves. It didn't burst, it welcomed him, flowing through his fingers, leaving trails of light that wrapped gently around his wrist. It felt like soft wind or warm laughter, something that wasn't quite touch, but carried feeling all the same. He exhaled, releasing a trail of bubbles that drifted upward. But instead of floating away, they joined the waves, spinning into tiny galaxies before vanishing into the current. "Wow," he whispered. His voice echoed faintly, not through air, but through vibration, like the whole sea had heard him, and answered in shimmering sound. A faint melody began to hum from somewhere unseen, low and rhythmic, like the tide breathing. The ocean seemed to respond to him, rippling outward in slow circles every time he moved. It was alive, but not dangerous. It felt like he was inside a dream that finally understood him. He began to swim slowly, gently, though the water didn't resist him. He didn't even have to move his arms. The current itself guided him forward, as if welcoming him deeper into the heart of the dream. The further he drifted, the brighter the light became. Below him, the seafloor revealed itself not made of sand, but of glassy mosaics. Giant bubble coral structures rose like cathedrals, their walls glimmering with opal color. Between them, luminous kelp swayed in slow motion, every leaf transparent, every motion echoing like a breath through the sea. Schools of bubblefish swam by, not creatures of flesh, but glowing silhouettes of memory. They darted and twirled, leaving trails of prismatic ripples behind. Each one made a tiny musical note as it passed, the ocean turning into a soft symphony of shimmering tones. SpongeBob laughed softly, the sound instantly multiplied, turning into musical echoes that blended with the rhythm of the waves. He clapped once, and hundreds of small bubbles burst into tiny sparks of light that floated like fireflies. It wasn't just beautiful, it was alive with joy. He floated higher, turning slowly as he tried to take it all in. The ceiling of this bubble ocean glowed faintly, a huge dome of translucent color, swirling like oil on water. Every so often, a shadow of something enormous passed beyond it, shapes like jellyfish, whales, even stars. They weren't threatening. They were part of the ocean's endless dreamscape. He whispered, "It's like the whole ocean is dreaming." And then for a moment he thought, He could hear voices faint, overlapping, like laughter carried from a great distance. Patrick's giggle, Sandy's calm voice explaining a new invention, Squidward's clarinet humming faintly, Mr. Krabs shouting something about a sail. The sounds rippled through the waves and then faded again, like bubbles carried by the tide. SpongeBob's eyes softened. "You're here too," he said, smiling. "All of you." He continued to drift until he reached the crest of a vast bubble wave. Below him, the sea seemed to stretch into infinity, rippling light, bending around invisible shapes. The bubbles reflected not just color, but scenes, fragments of his life flashing within them for a moment before vanishing. He saw the Krusty Krab, shining with its familiar neon sign. He saw the fields where he and Patrick used to catch jellyfish. He saw Gary sliding slowly across the living room floor, eyes half-lidded, in that sleepy, unimpressed way only Gary could manage. Each scene lasted only a second, then dissolved back into light. He reached toward the Krusty Krab, and for a moment, his hand actually entered the reflection. Warmth surrounded him. The scent of a fresh Krabby Patty filled the water. He could hear Mr. Krabs counting money somewhere in the back. But when he tried to step forward, the bubble gently pushed him back, rippling like a curtain of light. SpongeBob nodded slowly, whispering, "Not yet." He understood that this ocean wasn't made for revisiting, it was made for remembering. Every bubble was a memory caught between what was and what could be. To touch one too long would mean staying behind, and he wasn't ready for that. The melody grew softer. The waves around him slowed. And then he noticed something ahead. At the farthest horizon of the bubble sea, a single column of light rose upward, piercing through layers of reflection. It pulsed gently, steady and slow, like the rhythm of a heartbeat. The current beneath him began to shift, carrying him toward it. He didn't resist. He simply folded his hands behind his back, letting the tide move him. As he floated closer, the colors around him began to change, pinks turning to lavender, blues fading into white. The waves grew gentler, their reflections smoothing out until the sea looked like a sheet of glass. Above him, faint ripples of energy shimmered like auroras, casting soft motion across the scene. And then he saw them floating orbs in the distance, larger than any bubbles he had seen before. They moved slowly, pulsing faintly in rhythm with the column of light. Inside each one, faint shadows drifted, shapes, figures, scenes he couldn't yet make out. Something about them felt different, deeper, quieter, older. He whispered, "What are you?" But the sound was swallowed by the current. A single orb drifted closer. Its light reflected softly on his face. He peered inside and gasped. Inside the bubble, he saw a younger version of himself, smaller, eyes wide with the excitement of his first day at the Krusty Krab. The little SpongeBob held his hat proudly, standing beside Mr. Krabs. It looked so real that he could almost feel the texture of that old uniform, smell the grease and salt from the grill. He watched the scene repeat, looping endlessly, his younger self smiling, waving, turning the spatula in perfect rhythm. SpongeBob's voice trembled. "That's, me." The younger SpongeBob looked up suddenly as if sensing something. Their eyes met through time, through reflection, through dream. The younger one smiled wider, gave a small thumbs up, and faded into light. The bubble popped, scattering a burst of shimmering dust. The closer SpongeBob drifted toward the column of light, the more he began to feel it rather than see it. It wasn't simply a beam shining through the water, it was alive, pulsing with rhythm like the ocean's very heartbeat. Each pulse sent a ripple across the sea, and every bubble nearby trembled softly in response, releasing faint chimes as if the whole ocean were singing in harmony. The current grew stronger. It didn't pull him roughly, it invited him, guiding him like a tide that knew his name. SpongeBob's arms floated lazily at his sides, his eyes half wide in wonder. The closer he came, the more he saw that the column wasn't made of light alone. Inside it, countless streams of tiny bubbles spiraled upward, moving in perfect harmony. It looked like a waterfall reversed, a glowing current, flowing up into infinity. He stopped just short of its base, suspended above a flat plain of glassy water. Below him, he could see his reflection shimmering faintly. But this reflection wasn't quite right. It moved a little slower. Its eyes were slightly different, older, softer, like someone who had already seen this dream before. He tilted his head. So did the reflection. But when he raised his hand, the reflection waved first. A chill ran through him, not of fear, but of realization. "You're not me," he whispered. The reflection smiled, a calm, peaceful smile, and placed its hand against the inside of the water. SpongeBob hesitated, then did the same. Their hands met no resistance, no splash, just light. The moment their palms touched, a pulse of energy rippled outward, distorting the sea around them. The column of light brightened. And in that instant, SpongeBob's mind filled with visions, not of the past, but of connection. He saw Patrick chasing bubbles across jellyfish fields, their laughter echoing endlessly. He saw Sandy building a tiny submarine in her tree dome, looking proud. He saw Squidward sitting alone at his window, a faint smile flickering as he listened to the rain. He saw Mr. Krabs locking the Krusty Krab door at night and whispering something softly, maybe a thank you to the ocean itself. Every friend, every moment, every piece of Bikini Bottom, they were all here, reflected in the light of this ocean. Every bubble carried a memory, and every memory carried love. The reflection's voice echoed faintly, though its lips never moved. "You've built more than a home, SpongeBob. You've built a world inside your heart." The words weren't really heard, they were felt. The light within the column shimmered brighter, sending soft waves through the sea. For a moment, SpongeBob felt tears form at the corner of his eyes, but they didn't fall. They simply turned into small bubbles that floated upward, glowing softly before merging into the current. He whispered, "I didn't know. It was all still here." The reflection nodded once and then began to fade, dissolving into hundreds of tiny bubbles that joined the spiraling light. SpongeBob watched them rise until they vanished, their glow fading like distant stars. He looked up again. The column stretched infinitely above him, fading into white. It was like a bridge between worlds, between waking and dreaming, between memory and peace. He reached forward. As soon as his fingers brushed the column's surface, everything shifted. A wave of warmth flooded through him. The world blurred, and the ocean began to move, not as separate bubbles now, but as one living current. He felt it carrying him upward, past layers of glowing waves and swirling shapes that looked like memories breaking free from their shells. He rose higher, surrounded by spirals of light. Each rotation showed him something new, glimpses of his own life mixed with fragments of others. He saw jellyfish drifting above glowing coral, Mrs. Puff steering a small boat through quiet waters, even Plankton and Karen sharing a rare moment of silence, staring at the lights. Everyone's story, everyone's joy, everyone's quiet moment of peace, all reflected together in the flow. The current slowed. He hovered now inside the column itself, suspended in its glow. Around him, the walls shimmered like liquid mirrors. His reflection appeared again, but this time not alone. Patrick's face appeared beside his, grinning as always. Then Sandy's, proud and kind. Then Squidward's, frowning faintly but with tired affection in his eyes. They weren't real, not physically, but their presence filled the space like sunlight through water. He reached toward them and they smiled. The light around him pulsed brighter every face, every reflection merging into a single, brilliant wave of white-blue radiance. And then something unexpected happened. The current split into pathways like branching rivers of light. Each path led to a different direction, one glowing golden, one violet, one pale turquoise. He could feel that they represented choices, different dreams, different emotions. One path felt warm and nostalgic, filled with laughter and music. Another felt calm and quiet, filled with reflection. And the last one shimmered with mystery, a place unknown, calling softly like a distant song. SpongeBob floated at the center, unsure which to follow. He closed his eyes and listened. The ocean hummed softly like a lullaby. It didn't ask him to choose. It only whispered, "Keep drifting. You don't have to know where you're going, only that you're carried by love." His eyes opened slowly, glowing faintly with reflection light. He smiled that simple, pure smile that only SpongeBob could make, and spread his arms. "I'll just keep floating," he said softly, "and see where the bubbles take me." The current responded, sending a swirl of light around him like a gentle embrace. The three paths merged again into one, and the sea brightened. The flow began to lift him higher, upward toward something unseen. Below him, the ocean stretched endlessly, still shimmering, still alive. The reflections of his friends faded into glowing ripples, their laughter echoing faintly through the waves. Above him, the light grew stronger, no longer a column, but a full ocean of brightness waiting to receive him. As SpongeBob drifted higher within the glowing column, the world around him began to shimmer and reshape. The light no longer came from one direction, it was everywhere. It filled the sea like golden dawn flooding a window, dissolving all edges and turning the water into a soft, endless glow. He could no longer tell if he was rising or standing still. The feeling of movement was gentle, like floating inside a dream where everything breathes in rhythm with your heartbeat. Tiny bubbles spiraled around him in slow, graceful patterns, each one glowing faintly from within, each one carrying something like a whisper. He reached toward one as it floated by. Inside it, he saw a tiny image, Patrick and him sitting on the edge of a coral cliff, dipping their toes in the water. The memory shimmered for a moment, then dissolved as the bubble drifted upward. Another bubble passed. Inside it, Squidward stood on a small stage, playing his clarinet to an empty crowd, yet the sound echoed beautifully through the sea. SpongeBob smiled. He didn't laugh this time. He simply watched, appreciating the calm. A third bubble showed Sandy in her tree dome, polishing a small invention that glowed like starlight. The look of concentration on her face was peaceful, happy as if she'd finally built something perfect. Every bubble was a story, every reflection a heartbeat. SpongeBob turned slowly. Surrounded by them, hundreds, thousands, drifting in all directions like constellations in a watery sky. For the first time, he realized this wasn't just his dream. It was everyone's. The ocean itself seemed to breathe, pulsing softly. And then he noticed the bubbles weren't random. They were moving together, drawn upward into spirals that converged at a single point far above. At the center of that spiral glowed something immense, a circular shape, half transparent, half solid, like a moon made entirely of shimmering film. The bubble moon, he thought, as he began to drift toward it. As he rose, the bubbles passing him began to hum faintly, harmoniously. Their sound merged with the current, forming a melody that wasn't quite music, but wasn't silence either. It was something deeper, something that felt like remembering. The closer he came to the moon, the brighter everything became. It wasn't blinding, it was soothing, warm, like being wrapped in sunlight through the sea. And then, without warning, the current slowed, and SpongeBob found himself standing on a flat surface made of pure light. Below him, translucent waves rippled like glass, and every step sent small rings through the surface, each one blooming into new bubbles that floated upward and vanished. He looked up. The bubble moon hovered just above him, rotating slowly. Its surface reflected everything, the whole ocean, all the drifting memories, and even SpongeBob himself. But his reflection wasn't the only one. Dozens of faces appeared beside him. Patrick, Sandy, Squidward, Gary, Mr. Krabs, even Plankton. They weren't solid or alive, just luminous silhouettes formed from the memories that filled the sea. SpongeBob gazed at them in awe. "You're all here," he whispered, his voice soft and echoing slightly as if the ocean carried every word gently through its heart. Patrick's reflection smiled wide. "Of course we are, buddy. You think we'd let you float off without us?" Sandy's reflection crossed her arms, smiling kindly. "Looks like your curiosity landed you in quite the discovery." Squidward sighed dramatically, but even his luminous form couldn't hide a hint of fondness. "Only you would turn an accident into a dream opera." SpongeBob laughed quietly. "I guess I did." Their reflections flickered, blending with the glowing waves. Each one faded slowly, but their warmth remained, wrapping around him like invisible hands. As they faded, the ocean began to move again, not violently, but purposefully. The current formed a great circular motion, a whirlpool made of light. SpongeBob stood at the center as the ocean began to hum louder. The melody deepened. The water shimmered. The light from the bubble moon poured downward like liquid gold. SpongeBob closed his eyes. In that stillness, he began to feel it everything. The laughter, the mistakes, the long days at work, the quiet nights, the joy of friendship, the simple beauty of living under the sea, all of it rippled through him. It was as though the ocean was showing him that nothing was ever truly gone. Every memory, every feeling, every friendship lived on, reflected forever in the bubbles that filled its heart. He whispered softly, "So this is what the ocean remember." The current replied not with words, but with warmth, a gentle wave that lifted him higher, until he was face to face with the enormous moon-like bubble. Its glow bathed him in pure white-blue light. The surface rippled, and his reflection appeared again. But this time, the reflection moved on its own. It smiled, reached out, and placed its hand gently on the other side of the bubble. SpongeBob did the same. The moment their hands met, a sound like a deep breath filled the ocean. The bubble pulsed once, and then everything went still. The next moment, the moon opened. Not with a shatter, not with a burst, but with a quiet, graceful unfolding, like petals opening in slow motion. Inside, there was only brightness, soft, endless, inviting. And at its center floated something small, a tiny glowing bubble, no bigger than SpongeBob's hand. He reached for it carefully. The moment he touched it, the light expanded, wrapping him gently like a blanket. He felt peace, not the kind that comes from silence, but the kind that comes from knowing everything is whole. His last thought before he closed his eyes was simple and full of love. "I think I understand." And the ocean answered with silence, the kind that carries songs too deep for words. The current began to slow again, the light dimming just enough for the stars of the bubble sea to appear around him once more. The bubble moon closed quietly, like a dream ending on its own time. SpongeBob floated upward again, lighter than before, glowing faintly from within a small reflection of the very light he had touched. The light surrounding SpongeBob softened into hues of moonlight, and pearl a gentle fade from glowing brilliance to something more serene. The great bubble moon above him pulsed one last time, sending slow ripples through the sea. The sound it made was almost a sigh, like the entire ocean exhaling in relief. SpongeBob drifted slowly downward, his body weightless, his thoughts quiet. The glow from the moon shimmered on his face, and his eyes reflected tiny stars that danced across the water. All around him, the smaller bubbles were returning, drifting lazily through the current, spiraling like snow in a gentle breeze. But now they weren't filled with scenes or memories. They were clear, pure, soft, as if every story had already been told, and what remained was peace. He reached out to touch one. It didn't show him a reflection, but it felt warm against his fingertips. It pulsed gently, and when he pulled his hand away, a faint trail of light followed, curling upward like a ribbon before fading into the dark. He smiled. "Thank you," he whispered to the bubble, though he wasn't sure why. It simply felt right. The ocean hummed quietly in return. Not a melody this time, but a deep, continuous tone that vibrated through his whole body, grounding him in the dream. As he floated downward, the scenery changed. The vast, luminous sea began to dissolve into something softer, shadows of coral, faint outlines of seaweed swaying slowly, the suggestion of the familiar world returning. But it wasn't exactly Bikini Bottom, not yet. It was like seeing it through a dream where everything glowed faintly from within. He could make out shapes in the distance. The curve of his pineapple house, Patrick's rock, Squidward's tall stone face, all of them shining slightly, as if they too had become part of the dream. The currents of the bubble ocean carried him gently closer. As he approached, the bubbles began to gather again, forming delicate chains that twisted and connected, like threads weaving a tapestry. He realized they were forming pathways, bridges of light stretching from one memory to another, from one soul to the next. Each time a bridge formed, he could feel a faint pulse of joy, not his own, but everyone's. Patrick's laughter echoing faintly through the current. Sandy's calm voice humming a tune. Mr. Crab's delighted chuckle as he dreamed of golden coins shimmering in coral light. Even Squidward's sighs were soft, not annoyed but relaxed, like someone finally finding a moment of rest. They were all dreaming too, all floating somewhere in their own bubble seas. And in that realization, SpongeBob felt something warm fill his chest, not light, not water, but love, a simple, glowing warmth that expanded outward like the sunrise through glass. He whispered, as if the sea could hear him. "We're all connected here, aren't we? Even when we're apart." The currents swirled once, as though nodding. Then from above, a new kind of light began to appear. It wasn't the glow of bubbles or moonlight. It was softer, warmer, more familiar. The faint blush of dawn filtering through the top of the ocean. SpongeBob looked upward. The surface shimmered faintly like a mirror between worlds. The first rays of morning were beginning to pierce through, scattering light into golden fragments. He could feel the dream beginning to fade, but it didn't feel sad. It felt right. He turned once more to look at the sea below, at the vast, luminous field of bubbles, still floating like stars in the deep. Their glow began to dim, one by one, until they resembled the last few embers of a gentle fire. The bubble moon itself was dissolving, breaking into thousands of smaller bubbles that rose and joined the current. It was like watching the night sky scatter into morning mist. SpongeBob whispered softly, "Goodbye, beautiful ocean." He floated upward, letting the current carry him toward the surface. Each passing moment grew brighter, warmer, calmer. The hum of the dream quieted until it became almost silent. A single bubble drifted beside him, small, clear, and pulsing faintly. It seemed to follow him as he rose, keeping pace like a gentle companion. He smiled at it, half sleepy. "You're still here?" The bubble shimmered, and for just a second it reflected his friends again. Patrick smiling, Sandy waving, Squidward rolling his eyes, but smiling anyway. And then it faded, leaving only soft light. SpongeBob took a slow breath, feeling the water cool and familiar again. The warmth of the ocean returned, the soft pressure of home, not a dream now, but real. Above him, the surface broke open into shimmering gold. He drifted closer until light poured over him completely. Then pop! The last bubble burst. A gentle whoosh of air brushed his face, and he opened his eyes. He was back in his room. The lamp beside his bed glowed faintly. The sound of distant ocean currents hummed outside the pineapple walls. For a moment he just lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to remember if what he'd seen was real. On his nightstand, a single small bubble floated upward from his bedside, slow, shimmering, catching the early morning light. It hovered near his face, reflected in his eyes, and then pop! A faint sparkle of golden dust drifted down, fading into the quiet room. SpongeBob smiled, curling deeper into his blanket. "Guess it wasn't just a dream after all," he murmured softly. He closed his eyes again, and for a brief moment before sleep reclaimed him, he could still hear it, the faint hum of the bubble ocean, echoing somewhere deep beneath the waves. And far outside, through the coral streets of Bikini Bottom, the first rays of sunlight passed gently through the sea, catching the tiny floating bubbles that drifted up from the sand, turning them into small glowing stars. SpongeBob drifted higher and higher through the glimmering ocean of bubbles. Each pulse of light carried him upward as if invisible hands were guiding him towards something sacred. The glow around him began to shift, no longer cool blues and silvers, but warm shades of amber and rose, like sunlight filtered through liquid glass. He blinked slowly, still half in dream, half in awe. The higher he rose, the more the water thinned into a strange brightness. The weight of the ocean seemed to fade, replaced by a soft pressure, gentle and buoyant, like air wrapped in silk. He realized he was no longer swimming. He was floating, truly floating. No need to move, no need to breathe. The sea itself carried him like a cradle. Then, as if responding to a silent cue, the light ahead of him parted. Through it emerged something breathtaking, a vast island made entirely of bubbles. It floated in the middle of the glowing void, enormous and delicate. Its surface shimmered with colors that constantly changed, one moment lavender, then turquoise, then pale gold. Its mountains were made of stacked, translucent domes, and rivers of smaller bubbles flowed gently down their slopes like silver threads. SpongeBob's mouth fell open. Wow. He drifted closer. Every bubble on the island's surface reflected a scene, some of Bikini Bottom, others of places he had never seen before. Jellyfish meadows in bloom, coral forests glowing like lanterns, the faint silhouette of a great whale swimming through the distant dark. The air, or whatever surrounded him now, shimmered faintly with energy. Every breath felt like inhaling starlight. He landed softly on the edge of the island. Beneath his feet, and the surface felt bouncy but stable, like standing on the skin of a giant bubble. It didn't pop, it simply hummed quietly, resonating with each of his steps. "Hello," SpongeBob called out, his voice echoing softly through the vast stillness. For a moment there was no answer, only the faint sound of bubbles rising and popping in the distance, like rain falling in slow motion. Then a whisper, not words but music. The same melody he had heard faintly before, soft, distant chimes carried through the water. The tone was sweet, patient, and endless, as if the island itself was singing. He followed the sound, walking deeper into the glowing expanse. The trees here were unlike anything he had seen. Tall columns of clustered bubbles rising into spirals, their branches gently swaying in invisible currents. Some carried glowing fruit that looked like liquid pearls, shimmering when touched by the light. As he passed beneath them, the light dappled across his face, reflections rippling softly, as though he was walking under a sea of stars. The melody grew stronger. It came from the center of the island, where a great bubble lake shimmered like a mirror. The water's surface reflected the entire dream world above the bubble skies, the soft light, the distant shapes of floating coral hills. SpongeBob approached the edge carefully, his hands clasped in front of him. His reflection looked calm, more peaceful than he had ever seen himself. There was no restlessness, no excitement, just serenity. He crouched, tilting his head. The reflection in the lake blinked but a fraction of a second after he did. He gasped. "Whoa. You're not just me, are you?" The reflection smiled faintly, not mischievously, not eerily, but kindly. It felt like looking into the part of himself that always understood, even when he didn't have the words. The reflection reached upward through the shimmering surface, its hand breaking into ripples of light. SpongeBob instinctively reached forward too. Their fingertips almost touched, and the lake pulsed with a gentle hum that vibrated through the whole island. For an instant, the world around him seemed to slow down. He could feel the memories stored in the bubbles that made up the island. Each one glowed faintly with emotion, laughter, warmth, quiet moments, forgotten adventures. They weren't just his memories, they were everyone's. He saw Patrick smiling under a glowing sky, Sandy sketching equations in a field of coral, Squidward painting quietly, the color of the sea reflected in his eyes. Each memory flickered around him like lanterns, drifting slowly upward and disappearing into the soft light above. The reflection in the water spoke not in sound, but directly in feeling. SpongeBob didn't hear words, but he understood perfectly. Every bubble remembers. Every moment stays somewhere. You only forget because you must make room for more joy. He blinked, his eyes soft. More joy. The reflection nodded. Dreams are just the ocean's way of giving back what you give it every day. SpongeBob felt tears forming, not from sadness, but a deep, grateful peace. He whispered, "That's beautiful." The lake glowed brighter, the color deepening into a calm blue-white. Tiny bubbles began to rise from its center, swirling upward like glowing fireflies. Each one shimmered, showing brief images of Bikini Bottom, everyone sleeping peacefully, the nightlights glowing faintly through the coral mist. The melody returned soft, circular, echoing through the sky like a lullaby for the entire ocean. SpongeBob lay down beside the lake, resting his head on his arms. The surface pulsed softly beside him, almost breathing. Above him, the floating island drifted gently in the glow, surrounded by infinite stars of light. It was as if the ocean had created this place to cradle every dream, every laugh, every gentle memory. He felt the hum of it deep in his chest, the pulse of the bubble world, calm and timeless. His eyelids grew heavy again. As he drifted into stillness, the reflection in the lake placed its hand on the surface, glowing faintly. The light spread outward in slow ripples, surrounding SpongeBob in warmth. The world had gone quiet, not the kind of silence that feels empty, but one that holds its breath. SpongeBob slowly sat up beside the glowing lake, the light glimmering softly on his face. The dream world around him pulsed in time with something greater, like the heartbeat of the ocean itself. Far above, the bubble sky shimmered faintly, its surface gently curving like the inside of a crystal sphere. From the center of that glow, faint trails of light began to drift downward, curling and weaving in the air like ribbons. They looked almost like falling stars, except they didn't fall. They floated, circling around him with calm purpose. He reached out, and one of the trails of light touched his fingertip. It didn't feel hot or cold. It felt alive. It pulsed softly, then floated upward again, joining hundreds of others dancing lazily through the air. As he stood, SpongeBob noticed the hum again, the same soft, musical tone that had guided him to the island. It wasn't coming from the lake anymore. It was coming from everywhere. The trees of the island, tall bubble pillars, twisted into elegant shapes, began to vibrate faintly. Their branches rippled, and tiny bubbles detached, floating upward in slow motion. Each one shimmered a different color, and as it rose, it released a faint sound. A note, then another, then hundreds. It was as if the whole island had begun to sing. The sound wasn't loud, but layered like wind chimes made of water and light. Each note blended with the next, forming a pattern too soft to be called a melody, but too beautiful to be noise. It carried emotion instead of rhythm, memory instead of structure. SpongeBob stood perfectly still, his wide eyes glowing with reflection. His heart fluttered with quiet excitement, but he didn't dare speak. It felt like interrupting something sacred. He walked slowly through the trees, listening carefully. Each time he passed beneath one, the sound changed. The bubbles around him hummed differently, as if responding to his presence. At one tree, the hum deepened low and warm. The bubbles there glowed a golden hue. SpongeBob leaned close, and inside of one of the bubbles, he saw a faint image, Patrick and him building a sandcastle that immediately collapsed. Both of them burst out laughing. SpongeBob chuckled quietly, eyes softening. "That was a good day," he whispered. He moved to another tree where the bubbles shimmered pale blue. The hum here was softer, tender. Inside one, he saw Sandy helping him fix a broken jellyfishing net. She smiled, patted his shoulder, and the image faded. He pressed his palm gently against the bubble's surface. "Thank you, Sandy," he murmured. As he walked deeper, more memories came alive around him. Squidward painting by his window while raindrops tapped against the glass, Mr. Krabs polishing his treasure chest while humming to himself, even Plankton tinkering quietly on a small invention that for once didn't explode. Each bubble sang differently. Each note was a feeling. Together, they created a symphony of life, imperfect, beautiful, endlessly kind. SpongeBob stopped in the middle of a clearing where the air shimmered with tiny lights. He sat down on the soft, cushiony surface of the island, crossing his legs. "You're all still here," he said quietly to no one and everyone. "Every laugh, every moment. You never really go away." The wind, or whatever passed for wind in this dream, carried the sound of his words, weaving them into the hum. The trees seemed to echo back his voice, faintly altered but still his. He realized, with sudden clarity, that the island wasn't just made of bubbles, it was memory itself. Every joy, every act of kindness, Every bit of friendship that ever existed in the ocean had drifted here, forming this glowing sanctuary of light. He looked up. Far above, where the bubble sky curved into infinity, faint silhouettes drifted, massive, slow shapes. Jellyfish. Hundreds of them, glowing softly, moving in graceful unison. Their bodies pulsed with the same rhythm as the island's hum, each one releasing small streams of glowing bubbles that rained down like stardust. It was breathtaking. The dream had expanded again, no longer just a place, but a living symphony. SpongeBob felt something rise in his chest, not sadness, but a full, swelling warmth, a kind of happiness that was so pure it almost hurt. He closed his eyes and whispered, "I wish Patrick could see this." As if answering him, one of the bubbles drifted closer. It shimmered with a faint pink hue. Inside, he saw Patrick, not from a memory, but right now sleeping peacefully in his rock bed, drooling slightly, smiling in his sleep. SpongeBob giggled softly. "Sweet dreams, buddy." The bubble pulsed once, almost like it was laughing with him, then floated gently upward, joining the sky of lights. Everywhere he looked now, bubbles were drifting upward, rising like glowing lanterns. The hum was stronger, richer, building towards something not dramatic, but meaningful, like a lullaby that was about to end, leaving behind a quiet peace. SpongeBob continued walking through the clearing, his feet barely making a sound. The light rippled beneath each step, soft waves of color following him. He felt connected to the ocean, to his friends, to everything. It wasn't a thought or an idea, but a feeling so deep went beyond words, like remembering the warmth of sunlight after a long swim. He finally reached a large tree in the center of the island. It was the biggest one he had seen, a massive spiral of transparent domes that stretched high into the glowing mist. Its base was wide and round, with a hollow at the center filled with liquid light. The hum here was strongest, resonating in his chest like a heartbeat. He approached slowly, his hand hovering above the glowing pool. The light pulsed once, and he saw something inside, faint images flickering across its surface. His pineapple house, his friends, jellyfish fields, the crusty crab. It wasn't the past or the present. It was everything at once. The realization struck him with a quiet, beautiful clarity. This island, this dream, this glowing world wasn't just a place to visit. It was home in another form. He placed his hand gently on the surface of the pool. "Thank you," he whispered, voice trembling, "for letting me see it this way." The light rippled outward, slow and soft, like the island itself was saying, "You've always seen it this way. You just didn't notice." SpongeBob smiled. His reflection smiled back. The golden pool shimmered beneath SpongeBob's hand, sending ripples of light that climbed the nearest trees. Each ripple glowed for a moment, then vanished, but as they disappeared, the trees themselves began to change. Their bubble trunks stretched upward, forming a winding, spiral pathway that reached into the glowing mist above. SpongeBob looked up, eyes wide, his reflection bending in the curved surfaces. The island was showing him a way forward, or maybe upward. Either way, his heart filled with that familiar blend of curiosity and wonder. He took a deep breath, the air here tasting faintly sweet, like seawater mixed with starlight, and stepped onto the glowing path. It was soft beneath his feet, like walking on a dream. Each step he took made the pathway hum softly musical notes that echoed outward, blending with the low chorus of the island. It wasn't random, it was deliberate, harmonious. The sound seemed to guide him, like an invisible hand was helping him find the rhythm of the world. The higher he climbed, the more the island below began to fade into light. He could still see the glowing lake and the singing trees, but they looked smaller now, almost like toys inside a bubble snow globe. As he walked, new bubbles drifted alongside him, floating gently at shoulder height. Each one carried a faint image inside moments that felt familiar but slightly different. One showed him laughing with Patrick while making jellyfish-shaped pancakes. Another showed Sandy teaching him to meditate, their eyes closed as wind swirled around. The bubbles weren't just memories, they were possibilities, reflections of kindness yet to come. He paused to watch one where he and Squidward were painting side by side. Squidward's art was serious and structured, while SpongeBob's was pure chaos colors everywhere, a rainbow explosion. Yet in the image, they were both laughing. SpongeBob tilted his head, smiling softly. "Maybe one day," he whispered. The bubbles shimmered, as if nodding, and floated away into the mist. He continued his climb. The air around him grew brighter, and a faint wind began to move through the space, but it didn't blow or push. It flowed like a current, slow and deliberate, as though the entire world was exhaling. At last, the path ended at a massive, glowing shape suspended in the mist. It looked like a giant bubble larger than SpongeBob's house, maybe larger than all of Bikini Bottom. But unlike any other bubble he'd seen, this one didn't reflect the world outside. Instead, its surface was translucent, and alive colors swirled within it, blending and changing like slow-moving clouds inside glass. It pulsed gently, like a heart. SpongeBob stepped closer, eyes wide. "Whoa," he breathed. His voice echoed softly inside the luminous air. Each pulse sent waves of soft light through the mist, blue, pink, and pale gold, illuminating everything in a warm glow. For a moment, it almost looked like dawn breaking underwater. He reached out a hand, hesitating just inches away. The last time he had touched something like this, the first bubble doorway, it had brought him here. What would this one do? He smiled faintly. "Well, here goes nothing." His fingertip brushed the surface. Instead of pulling him in, the bubble rippled outward, not rejecting him, but responding. The colors shifted around his hand, turning brighter, warmer. The hum deepened, resonating through his body, through his chest, down to his very heartbeat. And then, without warning, light enveloped him again. But this light was different. It wasn't blinding or sudden. It unfolded slowly, wrapping around him like a blanket. When it cleared, he found himself standing not outside the bubble, but inside it. The interior stretched in every direction, infinite and circular at the same time. Streams of glowing liquid drifted around him like ribbons of pure thought. Tiny bubbles swirled past, each carrying echoes of laughter, joy, and peace. It was as if he were floating inside the heart of the ocean's dream. He turned slowly, overwhelmed but calm. Then he heard a soft voice, not in words, but in feeling. It wasn't speaking to him. It was through him. "You've seen the world through kindness, SpongeBob. That's why you can walk here." He blinked. Who said that? The light around him shimmered, forming a faint outline, not of a person, but of flowing energy, like the shape of a wave caught mid-motion. "Every bubble remembers," the voice continued, gentle and deep. "Every smile, every kindness, every small act leaves a ripple. Those ripples become light. That light becomes us." SpongeBob's hands trembled slightly. "So this whole place, this world of bubbles, it's made of memories?" "More than that." The light pulsed softly. "It's made of care, of love, of the small moments that connect everything in the ocean." SpongeBob's eyes glistened. "Even the mistakes?" The voice gave a faint, melodic hum. Even those. They're just bubbles that drift until they find the right light. He smiled weakly, his heart swelling. The simplicity of it, the purity, felt like something he'd always known but never truly heard until now. Around him, the colors shifted again, forming faint images. He saw his friend Patrick waving with a goofy grin, Sandy tinkering with one of her inventions, Squidward sighing but smiling faintly. He even saw Mr. Krabs holding a coin that glowed not gold but pink, as if wealth had turned to affection in this world. The images drifted closer, circling him like a constellation. SpongeBob reached toward them, and the light around his hand pulsed again, warm and full. He whispered, "Thank you, all of you." The images smiled, fading slowly, and the great heart bubble pulsed once more. This time, the sound wasn't just a hum. It was a song, a low, rising tone that wrapped around him like waves in harmony, peaceful, endless, glowing. It wasn't music meant to be heard. It was music meant to be felt. The colors brightened, then softened, like the bubble itself was breathing. SpongeBob stood there, floating in awe, feeling the song flow through him. He closed his eyes, whispering to the air, "If this is a dream, I hope I never wake up." The voice answered faintly, distant and kind. "Dreams are not to escape life, but to remind it how to shine." He opened his eyes, and for a moment, he thought he saw his own reflection in the center of the great bubble, smiling back at him, but not as he was, as he felt, glowing, calm, infinite. The song continued soft, endless, echoing through the dream like the slow pulse of a sleeping sea. SpongeBob floated in the light, his arms open, his eyes half closed. Every color swirled around him in gentle circles, blue melting into pink, gold into white. It was as if time had forgotten to move. He could have stayed forever. The warmth, the peace, the steady rhythm of the song had all felt like home. But somewhere deep inside, another sound began to rise, a faint, distant heartbeat, not of the island, but of Bikini Bottom. It pulsed quietly beneath everything, slow and steady. Thump, thump. Each beat sent a ripple through the light, soft but certain. SpongeBob's eyes opened. The great bubble before him shimmered faintly, its once vivid hues beginning to thin. The voice, that calm, resonant presence that had spoken to him, returned, quieter now, like the last verse of a lullaby. It's time," it said. "The dream has shown what it needed to show." SpongeBob tilted his head. "Time? Time for what?" The light pulsed, slow and kind. "Dreams must end, so that their light can return with you. You carry it home." He looked down and gasped softly. The glowing ribbons that once surrounded him were beginning to dissolve into tiny, drifting motes of light. They floated gently toward him, sinking into his chest one by one. Each time one entered, he felt a wave of calm. Not sadness, not exactly, but a deep, knowing quiet, like the feeling you get after saying goodbye to a beautiful day. He whispered, "So this isn't goodbye, is it?" The voice smiled within the light. "Nothing that shines ever really leaves. It only changes form." SpongeBob placed the hand over his chest, where the last of the motes disappeared. His fingers glowed faintly for a moment, then dimmed. The colors around him began to fade completely, replaced by cool silvers and pale blues. The vast heart bubble slowly became transparent. For the first time, he could see beyond it, back into the swirling clouds of the bubble ocean, far below. He could almost see the glowing island, the trees of glass, the golden pool. They were fading too, dissolving like morning mist. SpongeBob sighed softly, smiling through it. "Thank you," he whispered, "to the island, to the voice, to the light to everything that had held him so gently. He felt the pull again, that quiet current that had carried him through every part of the dream. This time, it moved upwards. Not fast or forceful, but calm and steady. He looked down one last time as the floating island became a small, glowing shape in the distance. The heart of light pulsed once more, faintly, a goodbye heartbeat. Then everything below turned into a single, shining point. Upward he drifted. The mist became lighter, whiter. The air felt different now, thinner, cleaner. He realized he was nearing the end of the dream. Around him, new bubbles formed, smaller, fragile, carrying echoes of laughter. He saw flashes inside them. Patrick's face, Sandy's smile, Squidward's clarinet. Each one floated by, gentle and kind. They didn't stay long. They brushed past him like warm breezes. He whispered to each as they passed, "See you soon. Don't forget to smile. Thanks for being my friends." His voice echoed softly inside the glowing mist. Then ahead of him, something appeared faint at first, then clearer. A circular glow, like the surface of a bubble, turned light. It shimmered with every color he'd seen before: gold, pink, ocean blue, and soft lavender. It wasn't just another bubble. It was the same portal that had brought him here. The beginning, waiting to become the end. SpongeBob smiled faintly. "Guess it's time to go home." He floated closer. The hum of the portal filled the space, the same soft, low note that had started this journey. But now it sounded different, fuller, warmer, like it carried every memory with it. He took one last look around. The light was fading fast now. The island was gone. The clouds were gone. Only a few drifting lights remained like stars after dawn. He closed his eyes, breathed deeply, and touched the shimmering surface. The moment his hand met the light, everything burst into color. Not blinding, but endless soft waves of illumination that carried warmth, sound, and silence all at once. He felt himself falling, then floating, then simply being. When the brightness began to fade, SpongeBob felt something familiar under him. The soft texture of his pillow, the gentle hum of the ocean outside, the faint creak of his pineapple home. He opened his eyes. The room was quiet. His lamp was still glowing dimly. The night was calm, the same as before, but something about it was different. The air felt lighter. The rain outside sparkled faintly, as if every droplet carried a tiny reflection of the dream. He turned his head slightly and saw beside his bed a small bubble hovering in the air. Just one. It glowed softly, pulsing like a heartbeat. SpongeBob smiled. "You came back with me, huh?" He reached out gently, and the bubble floated onto his hand. Inside it, for just a second, he saw the glowing island, the golden pool, the spiral trees, and the light that had spoken to him. Then, with a soft pop, it vanished. A tiny shimmer of light fell on his bedsheet like a grain of starlight. SpongeBob lay back, his eyes heavy. His room filled with faint, rippling reflections from the rain outside. He felt a calm he couldn't quite describe, a mix of sadness, gratitude, and wonder. He whispered into the quiet, "Thank you, dream. I'll keep the light safe." Outside, a jellyfish floated by his window, its glow gentle and rhythmic like a heartbeat echoing from the depths. The sound of the rain slowed. The room dimmed. SpongeBob's eyes drifted shut again. And just before he fell fully asleep, he thought he heard the faintest echo of that voice, warm, distant, loving. "Sleep well, little dreamer. The bubbles remember." A final shimmer of light crossed the room. Then stillness. Only the rhythm of calm waves and the peace of a dream that had ended but not disappeared. The dream began to tremble, not from fear or chaos, but from a quiet, natural ending. The sea of light around SpongeBob shifted in slow circles, as if a deep tide had begun to move beneath the glow. The bubbles that once drifted lazily now formed a soft spiral, shimmering and breathing together. SpongeBob floated at the center of it, his arms open, his body weightless. He could feel the current wrapping gently around him, warm, soft, alive. It didn't pull sharply. It invited. The current whispered like the voice of the dream itself, saying without words, "Come now. It's time to return." He blinked, looking down through the transparent glow. Far beneath him, the dream world stretched endlessly, but it was fading. The coral-shaped clouds were becoming mist. The luminous waves were dissolving into sparkles. Even the floating island, once golden and bright, was now a faint silhouette, sinking deeper into the darkness. A quiet ache touched his heart. "I guess it's goodbye," he murmured. His voice drifted outward, rippling through the glowing current. The bubbles around him pulsed softly in reply, not as farewell, but as a gentle hum of understanding. Each bubble that passed him carried an image, a memory of the dream. He saw Patrick laughing beneath a glowing tree, Sandy gazing at an ocean made of light, Squidward peacefully playing his clarinet in a bubble that floated like a moon. Even Mr. Krabs, smiling faintly as coins of light shimmered through the air. Each memory was silent, beautiful, and weightless. SpongeBob reached out, brushing one of the bubbles with his fingertips. It quivered softly and burst, releasing a faint ring of golden light that faded almost instantly. He smiled. "You'll always be here," he whispered. The spiral tightened around him, rising higher, faster, but never frighteningly so. It was like being lifted by a warm breeze. The motion made the light flicker and shimmer across his face, pink, blue, lavender, white colors blending like soft music. The current carried him upward. As he rose, the sound of the dream world below began to fade, the hum, the melody, the slow rhythm that had followed him through every segment of this strange, peaceful journey. In its place came a new sound, a distant heartbeat, deep and steady, as if it belonged to the ocean itself. Thump, thump. It echoed faintly through the water, growing clearer as he rose higher. Each beat sent ripples through the spiral, and each ripple brought him closer to the top. He looked above. There, hovering in the soft distance, was the bubble portal. It shimmered in and out of view, glowing brighter than before, its edges rippling with colors that no one could name. It looked like liquid glass, spinning slowly in perfect silence. SpongeBob felt a rush of calm and excitement. His heart fluttered, but his breathing stayed soft. "That's the way home," he whispered. The spiral of bubbles adjusted its flow, aligning itself with the glowing doorway. SpongeBob tilted upward, allowing himself to be carried along. He moved with the current, graceful and slow, like a leaf carried by the tide. As he approached, the portal's surface became clearer. It was not just light, it was reflection. Inside it, he could see the faint image of his room, the pineapple-shaped walls, the little lamp on the nightstand, the pillow slightly indented from where he slept. It was all there, hazy but real. He smiled gently. There it is. But before he could reach it, something caught his eye. A smaller bubble floated up beside him, one that didn't seem part of the spiral. It pulsed with golden light, brighter than all the others. Curious, he cupped it in his hands. Inside, he saw himself and Gary curled up together, sound asleep. It was not a memory from the dream. It was happening right now. He gasped softly. That's me. The bubbles shimmered, then began to fade, turning transparent. SpongeBob felt a warmth in his chest. It wasn't magic or surprise, it was connection. The dream and the real world weren't separate after all. They were reflections of one another, two sides of the same light. The golden bubble dissolved in his palms, releasing tiny sparkles that danced around him before merging with the spiral current. SpongeBob whispered, "Thank you." Then, letting go of the moment, he looked upward once again. The portal was now close, so close that he could see the soft ripples on its surface, the faint hum vibrating through it. Each vibration matched the rhythm of the heartbeat he'd heard. Thump, thump, thump. With every pulse, the light grew stronger. SpongeBob reached out, fingers trembling slightly, not from fear, but from awe. The moment felt infinite, like the pause before a song's final note. As his hand neared the portal, the spiral of bubbles began to move faster. They encircled him, wrapping him in concentric rings of light. The whole dream world seemed to come alive for one final moment, shining, glowing, remembering. Beneath him, the last remnants of the dream sea faded into white. The current grew warmer, and his body felt lighter than air. The voice from before, that calm, wordless tone, whispered faintly through the current. "You've seen enough, little dreamer. Carry the light home." SpongeBob nodded softly. "I will." He reached forward and touched the portal. The moment his fingers made contact, the surface rippled outward like liquid glass. A burst of soft light bloomed around him, not blinding but gentle, like the warmth of sunrise through clear water. The bubbles around him began to burst one by one, each with a soft sound like tiny bells. Their light folded inward, streaming toward the portal's center. SpongeBob's form was drawn in with them, slow, graceful, dissolving into color. The last thing he saw as the light engulfed him was the faint outline of the dream below fading into nothingness, peaceful and complete. Then came silence. The light surrounded SpongeBob, gentle and endless. He felt no edges, no weight, no sound, just warmth and motion, as though he was floating inside a living star. The boundaries between himself and the world began to blur. His body felt less like a shape and more like a pulse, a rhythm, moving within another rhythm. He drifted through layers of color. First came blue, the color of calm, spreading like waves through his thoughts. Then pink, soft and shimmering, reminding him of jellyfish floating on sunny afternoons. Then gold, glowing like morning over the sea, warm enough to make him smile even in silence. He didn't move through these colors, they moved through him, whispering memories as they passed. He saw his pineapple house, tiny bubbles rising from its chimney. He saw his friends, their smiles glowing through the haze. Patrick waving lazily, Sandy tinkering with some strange invention that turned sunlight into bubbles, Squidward standing by his window, the faintest smile tugging at his mouth as he played his clarinet to the open sea. Each image came and went like the surface of water disturbed by ripples. He could feel them but not hold them. He didn't need to. The dream wasn't taking those memories away. It was returning them, sending them back into the waking world. The portal ahead widened. Its rippling surface looked closer now, like a calm mirror of liquid glass. From the center, faint spirals of light stretched outward like arms reaching to welcome him home. He reached forward again, his hand trembling as he floated closer. The light around his fingers melted into the glow of the portal, and for a single instant, he could see both worlds at once, the dream and reality overlapping. The ocean of light met the outline of his cozy room. His hand passed through, and he could feel the texture shift from liquid smoothness to soft fabric, from water to air. A faint hum filled his ears like distant singing. The melody wasn't from outside, it was from within him, the song that the dream had taught him, the quiet rhythm of acceptance, the music of remembering. As he moved farther through, the portal shimmered violently, for a heartbeat then began to calm, stretching open wider. A flood of tiny bubbles swirled around him, drifting upward like glowing stars. Each carried a faint reflection, flashes of coral gardens, moonlight over jellyfish, or his own laughter echoing beneath the waves. He realized then that these were not random lights. They were pieces of the dream, finding their way home with him. He whispered softly, "Come along. We'll all go home together." The portal pulsed once in reply. Then came the shift, that mysterious moment between sleeping and waking. The light grew softer, dimmer, more transparent. SpongeBob felt gravity again, though still weak. He looked down and saw a surface below him, a faint, curved horizon of shadow. At first, he thought it was the ocean floor. But as he descended, the image became clearer. It wasn't sand or coral, it was his bed. The realization made him smile. His blanket looked like a wave frozen mid-motion, rippling softly under the pale moonlight that filtered through the window. His pillow seemed enormous from up here, glowing faintly as if reflecting the dream's last traces of light. The tiny alarm clock beside the bed ticked once, a sound so sharp, so real, that it sent a gentle shiver through him. He was almost back. But the dream wasn't ready to let him go completely. The bubbles around him slowed, circling him one last time, glowing more brightly than ever. Their light made the room shimmer like the sea, each ray flickering over the walls in soft patterns. SpongeBob hovered above his sleeping self, watching. He could see his chest rise and fall, slow and peaceful. His face, though half hidden by the blanket, carried a small, content smile. It was a strange, beautiful sight, as though he were watching both his dream and his life at once. He whispered, "I'm home. I'm really home." The bubbles began to fade one by one. Each time one vanished, it left a faint sparkle that drifted upward toward the ceiling, where it dissolved into the air like starlight. The light in the room dimmed gently, the way a sunset fades into evening. Then one bubble, slightly larger, glowing faintly pink and blue, floated toward his sleeping form. It drifted down slowly, as if uncertain. SpongeBob followed it with his eyes, curious and quiet. The bubble rested just above his chest, right over his heart. For a moment, it hovered there, spinning slowly. Then, without a sound, it sank into him, merging with the faint glow beneath his skin. He felt it immediately. A warmth, small but steady, lighting up inside him. It wasn't the same as the dream's light. It was subtler, quieter, but alive. It was memory turned into feeling. He understood then what the dream had wanted him to know, that none of this would ever truly disappear. It had simply become part of him. Every laugh, every glimmer, every sound of ocean wind would live on inside, invisible but eternal. The portal behind him began to shrink, its edges curling inward. The glow dimmed until it was just a soft ring, then a dot, then nothing but a single floating sparkle. He watched it vanish, smiling softly. "Goodbye," he said. A faint voice, or maybe just an echo of his own thought, answered. "Not goodbye. Just remember." The last few bubbles around him burst in silence. The room grew still. The warmth faded from golden to pale moonlight. SpongeBob felt himself being drawn downward, Slowly, weight returned to his limbs. His vision grew hazy, not from sleep, but from waking. The last sound he heard from the dream world was that same deep heartbeat, now distant, fading like a drum underwater. Thump, thump after thump, then silence, and he was home. The blanket touched his cheek. The smell of salt and soap filled his nose, the familiar scent of his home under the sea. The rhythm of the tides hummed faintly beyond his walls. He blinked once, twice, then slowly opened his eyes. The room was dim, calm, still bathed in a faint bluish glow from the window. He didn't move right away. He just lay there, breathing, letting the quiet fill him. For a long moment, he wasn't sure whether he was awake or still dreaming. The line between the two had become too thin to tell. But it didn't matter. His heart was calm, his thoughts light. A soft bubble drifted upward from the corner of the room, just one floating toward the ceiling. It shimmered faintly, catching a streak of moonlight. Then it popped with a delicate sound, releasing a single sparkle that rose higher and vanished. When SpongeBob finally stirred, the faint light of dawn filtered through his window, not the bright golden glow of day yet, but that soft underwater twilight that comes before it. The kind of light that seems to breathe. He blinked slowly, adjusting to the quiet shimmer of his room. The ocean outside was still half asleep. Gentle currents brushed against the coral walls, sending ripples of light across his furniture. His snail, Gary, was curled up at the foot of the bed, snoring softly, each breath making tiny bubbles float up and vanish. For a long moment, SpongeBob didn't move. He felt light, not tired, not awake, but restored, as though he had just returned from somewhere far away. His hands rested on the blanket, which still glowed faintly with dreamlike reflections. When he pressed his palm against it, he almost imagined he could feel the hum of the bubbles, the faint rhythm of the dream still echoing in his chest. He whispered, "It's still here." The words drifted into the air and seemed to shimmer, as though the room itself was listening. He sat up slowly. The water around him swirled gently, reflecting a mosaic of colors: blue, lavender, silver, pink, the same palette that had filled his dream. Even the shadows on the walls looked softer, like they were drawn with light instead of darkness. The portal was gone, but something remained. A feeling the same kind that lingers after laughter, after kindness, after seeing something too beautiful to explain. SpongeBob climbed out of bed, his square feet touching the soft coral floor. The texture beneath his toes felt warm, alive. As he walked toward the window, faint trails of bubbles rose from his steps, catching the dim light before fading away. He smiled. It was like the dream was still playing along with him. Outside, the water was clear and still. He could see the shapes of jellyfish drifting lazily through the early morning glow. The fields beyond Bikini Bottom shimmered faintly, as though made of thin glass. Far away, the first rays of light were filtering through the surface, gentle, pale gold waves that rippled downward. He pressed his face against the window, watching. The view looked almost exactly like the dream, calm, endless, beautiful. But it was real. It was home. "Good morning, world," he whispered softly, his voice half laughing. "We made it back." The bubbles that rose outside seemed to nod in reply. He stepped back, stretching. His room looked peaceful. His alarm clock ticked quietly. His clothes hung neatly on their coral hooks. Everything felt familiar, yet touched by something invisible, as if the dream had dusted the whole world in a thin layer of light. On the shelf beside his bed, one small bubble still floated. He hadn't noticed it at first. It was barely there, faint, transparent. hovering just above the corner of his nightstand. Inside it, if he looked closely, he could see flickers of something, maybe the bubble ocean, maybe his friends waving, or maybe just light remembering its shape. He reached out and cupped it carefully in both hands. The bubble trembled, glowing faintly pink and blue, the same colors that had filled the portal. "Hey," SpongeBob whispered, as if greeting an old friend. The bubble pulsed once soft and slow, and he smiled. "You're the last one, huh?" He didn't pop it. He just watched it float away from his hands and drift lazily upward until it touched the ceiling and stayed there, catching the light like a tiny star. He let out a small sigh, not of sadness but of peace. Then came a sound faint, but comforting. Gary meowed softly, stretching and blinking open his sleepy eyes. He looked up at SpongeBob with the sort of puzzled look that said, "You've been up too early again." SpongeBob giggled quietly. "Morning, buddy. You wouldn't believe the dream I had." Gary yawned, blowing a tiny bubble from his mouth as he did. It floated toward SpongeBob and popped on his nose, leaving a tiny sparkle behind. SpongeBob blinked, laughing softly. Even that felt like a piece of the dream. He walked toward the kitchen, the soft creak of his floor echoing through the calm water. Every movement seemed slower, more deliberate. He could feel the rhythm of life again, the small, gentle pattern of existence that made everything meaningful. Footsteps, bubbles, warmth, breath. The kitchen was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. On the table, his spatula leaned against a small plate from last night's snack, a half-eaten kelp cookie. SpongeBob smiled at the sight of it, remembering how he'd promised himself just one more bite before bed. He sat down, resting his chin on his hands, gazing at the small cookie crumb floating near the edge of the plate. There was something oddly beautiful about it, a tiny imperfection, a moment caught between yesterday and today. He whispered, "Even small things sparkle if you look close enough." For a while he just sat there, breathing, listening to the rhythm of his own home, the bubbles from the sink, the slow heartbeat of the sea outside, the occasional creak of the pineapple stem above him. It all felt like music, a continuation of the lullaby the dream had left behind. A faint light shifted through the window, brighter now, morning fully breaking through. The golden rays filtered down, scattering in the water like liquid sunlight. And for just a moment, SpongeBob saw the faint circular shimmer right where the light hit the table. It looked almost like the outline of a portal. He blinked and leaned closer, curious. But when he reached out, it dissolved into nothing, just ripples of warm light across the wood. He smiled knowingly. "Guess you're still around, huh?" The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of presence, full of calm. Every object in the room seemed to glow with that soft awareness. His spatula, his favorite chair, even the faint crack in the coral wall. Everything hummed quietly, alive and peaceful. Then he heard it again, faint, gentle, almost inaudible. A soft pop. He looked up. The last bubble, the one floating on the ceiling, had finally burst. But instead of vanishing, it released a single, faint sparkle of light that floated downward, spinning slowly until it rested on the table in front of him. The sparkles shimmered for a few seconds, then faded, leaving behind only a small circle of still water, calm and perfect. SpongeBob reached out and traced the shape of the circle with his finger, smiling. "Goodbye," he whispered, and then paused, correcting himself with a grin. "No, see you tonight." The sea outside answered with a faint, rhythmic pulse, the sound of waves breathing, rising and falling like a living heartbeat. And as SpongeBob sat there, the dream didn't feel gone anymore. It felt woven into everything, into the water, the walls, his thoughts, even the air he breathed. The dream hadn't ended. It had simply come home. He looked out the window one more time, and the horizon seemed to shimmer. For just a moment, he thought he saw a faint outline, a swirl of bubbles in the distance, glowing gently, waiting. The soft hum of the ocean deepened, blending with the faint, distant chime of jellyfish bells. SpongeBob stood at the window of his pineapple house, hands pressed gently against the glass. The light outside was golden now, shimmering through the water like threads of silk. It wasn't just morning, it was renewal. He breathed deeply, the kind of breath that filled him all the way to the heart. The dream was gone, but its peace hadn't left. It lingered not as an image or sound, but as a feeling, a softness that stayed between thoughts, between heartbeats. SpongeBob smiled, the corners of his eyes glowing with warmth. He turned and looked around his room one more time. Everything seemed touched by something new, the air, the light. Even Gary, who was lazily crawling across the dresser, leaving tiny bubble trails behind him. "Morning, Gary," SpongeBob said softly. "Meow," Gary replied, blinking with sleepy calm. SpongeBob chuckled. "Yeah, it was a nice dream." He moved slowly toward his closet, humming an absent tune, one that sounded strangely familiar, though he couldn't remember ever learning it. It might have been the melody the bubbles sang in his dream, or maybe something the ocean had whispered to him as he drifted home. Either way, the sound filled the room with calm energy. As he put on his square pants and adjusted his tie, the water shimmered around him, faint sparkles catching the edge of the morning light. Each movement felt light, gentle, graceful, like he was still half floating through that glowing dream world. He stepped into the living room where the golden rays filtered through the porthole-shaped windows. The light rippled across the walls, bending through the water in soft waves. On the table lay a single jellyfish feather, a translucent thread that must have drifted in during the night. He picked it up, smiling softly. "I guess even the dream left me a souvenir." He tucked it behind a seashell picture frame right next to a photo of him, Patrick, and Sandy laughing together at Goo Lagoon. The feather caught the light perfectly, glowing faintly blue. Then, without a word, SpongeBob opened his front door. A burst of warm ocean current greeted him, gentle, playful, brushing against his face like a morning breeze. Outside, Bikini Bottom was waking up. Coral chimed faintly as currents passed through. Distantly, the faint sound of a clarinet floated through the water, Squidward, already practicing, his notes rising and falling like the ebb of the tide. Patrick's rock wobbled, then lifted slightly, a sign that his best friend was stirring beneath it. SpongeBob giggled. The world felt the same, yet different, brighter, more fragile, more alive. He stepped outside, his shoes gently sinking into the sandy path. Tiny air bubbles rose around his feet, glowing faintly in the golden light. As he walked toward the jellyfish fields, the light filtered through the surface above, rippling like dream reflections. The sea was quiet, but not empty, full of soft life. Small fish darted between coral fans, seahorses drifted lazily by, and here and there a few jellyfish glowed faintly pink and blue, the same colors that filled the dream world. SpongeBob stopped for a moment to watch one float past. Its tendrils shimmered in slow motion, each pulse sending small ripples through the water. "Hey there, little guy," he whispered. "You look familiar." The jellyfish pulsed once, glowing a little brighter, then drifted upward slowly, silently, until it disappeared into the sunlit haze above. SpongeBob smiled softly, as if saying goodbye again. A gentle peace spread across his chest, not sadness, but gratitude. The the kind that comes from knowing something wonderful happened, even if it can't happen again in the same way. He continued walking, following the familiar path that led toward the Krusty Krab. Along the way, he passed by jellyfish fields shimmering under a curtain of light. The air was full of tiny glints bubbles, pollen, sparks of plankton, all dancing like dust motes in sunlight. He reached out and touched the water just a light tap, and watched the ripples spread outward, forming faint circles. The circles reminded him of the bubbles from his dream portals, windows, memories. Maybe, he thought, dreams weren't places you visit. Maybe they were just another layer of the ocean, invisible during the day, glowing at night. He took a deep breath, letting the thoughts settle. "I think I get it now," he whispered. The Krusty Krab came into view ahead, quiet, golden in the morning light. The neon sign flickered faintly. Through the window, he saw Mr. Krabs wiping the counter, humming a sea shanty. Everything was normal again, but the colors seemed more vibrant, the water clearer, the light more alive. When SpongeBob stepped inside, the bell above the door chimed a soft sound that blended perfectly with the morning hum. Mr. Krabs looked up. "Ahoy there, lad! You're early today." SpongeBob smiled. "I couldn't sleep any more. Too peaceful outside to stay in bed." "Peaceful?" Mr. Krabs laughed, shaking his head. "That's one way to say it. The ocean's so calm, I can hear me own coins clinking." SpongeBob giggled and tied his apron. "That's a good sound to start the day with." As he began to prep the kitchen, the clinking of spatulas and soft sizzling of the grill mixed with the faint echo of Squidward's clarinet outside. The sounds blended into a rhythm, simple, warm, familiar. The same rhythm he'd heard in the dream, the steady pulse of existence, looping like bubbles rising toward the surface. He looked at the spatula in his hand, the light gleaming off its edge, and whispered quietly, "Everything's connected, isn't it?" The spatula shimmered, maybe just a reflection, or maybe something more. SpongeBob smiled and flipped the first patty of the day. Outside, the water glowed with life. Jellyfish drifted past the restaurant windows, their colors painting gentle waves across the walls. The sound of bubbles was constant, soothing, almost musical. And for just a moment, just a heartbeat of stillness, SpongeBob thought he saw it again. A faint portal shimmer floating in the distance, opening like a ripple of memory. It pulsed once, gently before dissolving into the morning light. He didn't need to go to it this time. He understood. The portal wasn't a doorway to another world. It was a reflection of the peace inside him, the calm he could carry into every morning, every laugh, every friendship,